This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been a trail runner for over 15 years. I've seen bear, moose, and all sorts of wildlife. I've been caught in sudden snowstorms and flash floods, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to me last month in Maine's 100-mile wilderness. I'm still shaking as I type this. Part of me doesn't even want to revisit it, but I feel like I need to warn others. I'd been planning this solo trek for months. The 100-mile wilderness is this really remote section of the Appalachian Trail in Maine. No roads, no towns, just pure wilderness. I'd done plenty of research, packed all the right gear, and felt totally prepared. I'm not some amateur. I've done multi-day solo hikes dozens of times before. The first day went perfectly. Weather was great, around 65 degrees, with this light breeze that kept the bugs away. I covered about 18 miles and set up camp near a small stream, slept like a baby, felt ready to tackle day 2 with the same energy. That's when things started getting weird. About 3 hours into my hike on the second day, I noticed something odd about the trail ahead of me. There were boot prints zigzagging across the path, not like someone who was drunk or lost, more like someone who was deliberately walking back and forth across the trail. At first, I didn't think much of it. People do weird things sometimes, right? But then I saw it, a candy wrapper. Not just tossed aside like normal trail litter, but perfectly folded into this tiny square and placed right in the middle of the path. It was a Reese's wrapper, folded with almost surgical precision. The placement was so deliberate it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Who does that? Who takes the time to fold trash and place it like that? I picked it up thinking I'd pack it out, leave no trace and all that, but something made me hesitate. The whole thing felt intentional, like it was meant to be found. I ended up taking a photo of it and then stuffing it in my pocket. The rest of the afternoon I felt on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. You know that feeling, right? When you just know you're not alone? Around 4 in the afternoon, I was hiking along this ridge with dense forest on both sides. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, human footsteps, about 30 or 40 feet behind me, the distinct crunch of boots on leaves and twigs. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Perfect silence. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" Nothing, just birds and wind. I started walking again. The footsteps resumed, perfectly matching my pace but staying the same distance behind me. I'm not easily spooked, but this freaked me out. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now. The footsteps behind me sped up too. I whipped around, heart hammering. "Hey, I can hear you. Show yourself." Dead silence. I stood there for at least 5 minutes, scanning the trees, looking for any movement. Nothing. Not even a squirrel. By the time I reached my planned camping spot for the night, I was exhausted from the constant vigilance. I set up my tent near a small clearing, built a fire, and cooked dinner. The whole time I kept looking around, listening for anything unusual. The woods seemed normal again. I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe it was just an echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the ridge. I hung my food bag in a tree about 100 feet from my campsite, bare precautions, and organized my pack for the next day. That's when I saw it, another Reese's wrapper, folded exactly like the first one, placed precisely on top of my pack. My blood ran cold. I hadn't taken my pack off since I'd set up camp. The wrapper wasn't there when I arrived. Someone had crept into my campsite while I was hanging my food bag and left it there. I grabbed my knife and headlamp and scanned the perimeter of my camp. "I know you're out there," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you want?" The forest swallowed my words. No response. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going and sat with my back against a tree, knife in hand, headlamp ready. Every sound made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it, deliberate pacing just outside the circle of my firelight. Back and forth, like someone walking a perimeter around my camp. Then the breathing started, heavy, almost exaggerated breaths, like someone wanted me to hear them. "I'm armed," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "The Rangers know where I am. They're expecting me tomorrow." That was a lie. I hadn't filed a detailed itinerary with anyone. Stupid, I know. The breathing stopped abruptly, then silence. Complete, terrifying silence that lasted until dawn broke. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up camp faster than I ever had before. I abandoned my original plan to continue forward and decided to head back the way I came. I just wanted to get to my car and get the hell out of there. I hiked at a near run for about 2 hours, constantly checking behind me. Nothing. No footsteps, no weird sounds. I started to relax slightly, thinking maybe I'd put enough distance between me and whoever was stalking me. That's when I saw him. I was crossing a small clearing when movement caught my eye. I turned and spotted a man standing at the tree line about 50 yards behind me. He had this scruffy beard and was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in another decade. Faded flannel shirt, worn canvas pants, old-school hiking boots. But it wasn't his appearance that made my heart stop. It was the rifle in his hands. Our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised the gun. I ran. I fucking ran like I've never run before. Tearing down the trail, jumping over roots and rocks, my pack bouncing painfully against my back. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming, but pure. Adrenaline kept me going. I don't know if he followed. I don't know if he fired. All I know is I ran for what felt like hours, taking random turns off the main trail, doubling back, anything to throw him off my trail. By some miracle, I made it back to the trailhead where my car was parked. I threw my pack in the trunk, hands shaking so badly I could barely get my keys in the ignition. I sped to the nearest ranger station about 20 miles away. The rangers didn't take me seriously. They nodded politely while I babbled about stalkers and folded candy wrappers and men with guns. One of them patted my shoulder and said, "Probably just a transient or someone living off-grid. They're usually harmless unless provoked. Did you approach his camp or something?" I couldn't believe it. No, he was stalking me. He left things in my camp. I showed them the photos of the wrappers on my phone. They exchanged glances. "Look, Mr. Hayes, we get reports like this sometimes. The wilderness plays tricks on people, especially solo hikers. Stress, exhaustion, isolation, it can make your mind interpret things differently." They took my statement, promised to look into it, and sent me on my way. I could tell they thought I was overreacting or making it up. I drove straight home, still looking in my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see that bearded face watching me from the roadside. A week later, still shaken, I posted about my experience on a hiking forum. I didn't expect much. Maybe some theories about who the guy might be, or others telling me I was imagining things. Instead, I got private messages from 4 different people who'd had similar experiences in the same area over the past 2 years. One woman found folded papers with children's names written on them placed in her boots while she slept. A couple described waking up to find their campsite rearranged. Nothing stolen, just moved to different spots. Another guy found a torn baby shoe hanging from a branch near his tent, and one hiker heard the distinctive sound of a gun being loaded outside his tent in the middle of the night. None of them reported seeing the bearded man, but the pattern was clear. Someone, or maybe multiple people, were stalking and terrorizing hikers in that section of the Appalachians. I've reported all of this to the state police now, but I'm not hopeful anything will come of it. The area is just too vast, too remote to patrol effectively. I keep thinking about that moment when our eyes met in the clearing. There was something in his expression, not just menace or threat, but something else. Recognition, maybe, like he knew me, or like he'd been waiting specifically for me. The other hikers who messaged me, we've started comparing notes, looking for patterns. Were we all similar types of hikers? Did we all camp in the same spots? Use the same kind of gear? We're trying to figure out if there's some reason we were targeted, or if it's just random terror. I've been hiking and trail running for most of my adult life. The wilderness has always been my sanctuary, my escape. Now I can't even look at my gear without feeling sick to my stomach. I've cancelled all my planned hikes for the rest of the year. I can't sleep without checking the locks 3 or 4 times. Every noise outside my window makes me freeze. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted from me or the others. All I know is something sinister is happening in that isolated stretch of the Appalachians, and no one in authority seems to be taking it seriously. So I'm warning all of you. If you're planning a hike through the 100-mile wilderness, don't go alone. Be vigilant, and if you find a perfectly folded candy wrapper on the trail, turn around immediately. I've tried to make sense of it all, tried to find some logical explanation. Maybe it's some twisted game to these people. Maybe they're protecting something hidden in those woods, or maybe they're just sick individuals who get off on fear. Whatever the reason, I know one thing for certain. I'll never hike alone again, and I'll never set foot in the 100-mile wilderness as long as I live. The wrapped candies still haunt me. Why Reese's? Why fold them so perfectly? Was it a signal, a calling card, some kind of sick trophy? I keep the photo of that first wrapper on my phone. Sometimes I stare at it, trying to understand, trying to make sense of something that might never make sense. If you've had a similar experience, please reach out. Maybe together we can figure this out. Maybe together we can get someone to take this seriously before something worse happens. Because I can't shake the feeling that I was lucky, that not everyone who encounters that bearded man makes it back to their car. Story 2. I've been hesitating to share this for months now, partly because I'm still processing, partly because I'm afraid nobody will believe me, and partly because writing it down makes it real all over again. But I need to get this out of my system. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar. Last summer I took what was supposed to be a relaxing solo road trip through the Appalachian Mountains with my cat Miley. It was my 6th solo trip, so I wasn't exactly a newbie at this. I had converted my 2008 Dodge Caravan into a mini camper with a bed platform, some storage, and all the basics. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and it represented freedom. Miley and I had a good system. She's always been great on trips, has her little litter box tucked away, her food station, and she actually enjoys looking out the windows while I drive. We'd been on the road for about a week, making our way through the Green Mountains in Vermont. The scenery was breathtaking. Lush forests, winding roads, little towns that looked frozen in time. On day 8, I found this perfect little spot off an old dirt road. Apparently, they'd built a newer road years ago, so this one rarely saw any traffic, exactly what I was looking for. I'm not much for crowded campgrounds with RVs and generators running all night. I just wanted peace, nature, and some time to read and sketch. I parked the van in a small clearing about 20 feet from the road. There was a fallen log that made a perfect bench, and I set up my little camp stove to make some tea. The afternoon was warm but not hot, with that perfect breeze that makes everything feel right in the world. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found such a perfect spot. Miley was doing her usual thing, exploring the immediate area around the van, rolling in patches of sun, then coming back to check on me. Around 4 in the afternoon, I was sitting on the log reading when I noticed her behavior change. She suddenly got really low to the ground, ears flattened, tail puffed up. I've had her for 7 years, and I'd never seen her react like that without reason. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car engine in the distance, getting closer. I didn't think much of it at first. Even on rarely used roads, you occasionally get a local passing through. But something about Miley's reaction made me uneasy. I put my book down and watched as an older model pickup truck, dark blue or maybe black, came around the bend. It was moving slowly, too slowly. As it approached my campsite, I could see 3 men inside. The driver looked to be in his 40s, weathered face, baseball cap. The other 2 were younger, maybe 30s. They all stared at me as they drove by. Not the casual glance you give when passing someone. This was different. They literally turned their heads and stared, maintaining eye contact for as long as possible as they rolled past. The truck slowed down even more as it passed my sight. I raised my hand in a half-hearted wave, trying to be polite despite the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. None of them waved back. As the truck disappeared around the next bend, a wave of dread washed over me. I can't explain why. Nothing had actually happened, but every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong. Miley was still in her defensive posture, and I decided right then to trust her animal instincts and my gut feeling. I quickly grabbed my backpack, shoved my wallet, phone, and a water bottle inside. I scooped up Miley, who was surprisingly compliant, like she also knew something was wrong, and moved quickly into the vegetation about 30 feet from my van. There was a large fallen tree with thick brush around it that created a natural hiding spot. I had barely settled into position when I heard the truck returning. My heart started pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it. The truck pulled up and stopped right beside my van. All 3 doors opened and the men got out. "Hello? Anyone here?" one of them called out. His voice sounded friendly enough, but something about it felt wrong, like he was trying too hard to sound normal. They spread out around my van. The oldest one, the driver, peered through the windows. Another checked the area where I'd been sitting, picking up my book and flipping through it. The third started walking around the perimeter, looking into the woods. He came within 15 feet of where Miley and I were hiding. I put my hand gently over Miley's mouth, terrified she might make a sound. "Looks like she just stepped away," one of them said. "Stuff's still here. Check the van," the driver said. What happened next made my blood run cold. The driver pulled out a handgun, aimed it at my driver's side window, and fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet forest. Miley jerked in my arms, but thankfully didn't make a sound. I was shaking uncontrollably, trying to breathe without making noise. The driver reached through the broken window, unlocked the door, and they all started going through my van. I could hear them throwing things around, opening compartments, talking in low voices I couldn't quite make out. "She can't have gone far," one said loudly enough for me to hear. "Spread out and look." That's when I knew I had to move. They were going to search the woods, and it was only a matter of time before they found us. With Miley clutched to my chest, I began to slowly back away, moving as quietly as possible deeper into the forest. Once I was about 100 yards away, I turned and started moving faster, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I remembered passing a gas station about a half-hour's drive back. On foot through the woods, I had no idea how long it would take to get there, but it was my only hope. I pulled out my phone to call 911, only to discover it was dead. I always keep it charged, but somehow it had completely drained. Whether it was the poor reception in the mountains or something else, I'll never know, but I've never felt so alone as I did in that moment. For what felt like hours, I made my way through the woods, trying to follow the general direction of the road without getting too close to it. Miley was surprisingly calm in my arms, like she understood the gravity of the situation. Every time I heard a vehicle, I'd freeze and duck down until it passed. The sun was starting to set, and the fear of being in these woods after dark was almost as terrifying as the men themselves. Finally, I saw the lights of the gas station through the trees. I stood at the edge of the forest, watching. There was only one car parked there, presumably belonging to whoever was working. I couldn't see any sign of the blue truck. I was faced with a terrible choice. Stay in the increasingly dark woods or trust whoever was working at this gas station. What if they knew the men? What if this was some kind of local thing? My mind was spinning with worst-case scenarios, but I knew I couldn't stay out here all night. Taking a deep breath, I emerged from the trees and ran across the parking lot. Through the windows, I could see just one person inside. A man probably in his early 50s with gray hair and glasses, restocking cigarettes behind the counter. I burst through the door, probably looking like a complete mess, scratched up from branches, dirt on my clothes, wild-eyed, clutching my cat. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. Some men broke into my van. They had guns." The look on his face told me he believed me instantly. He didn't hesitate or question me. "Where?" he asked, already reaching for the phone. I explained where my campsite was as he dialed. I could hear him talking to the police, giving them the location, telling them to hurry. When he hung up, he locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. "Come with me," he said, leading me to a storage room at the back. "Stay in here until the police arrive. They said about 15 minutes. Just as I was about to go into the room, we heard a vehicle pull up outside. The attendant looked at the security monitor mounted behind the counter. "Is that them?" he asked. I peeked at the screen and felt my knees go weak. It was the blue truck. The attendant's demeanor changed instantly. He reached under the counter and pulled out a shotgun, then opened a drawer and took out a smaller handgun, which he handed to me. "You know how to use this?" he asked. I nodded. My dad had taught me basic gun safety years ago, though I'd never owned one myself. "Get in the room," he said. "Lock it from inside. Only open it for me or the police." I did as he said, closing the heavy door and turning the deadbolt. The storage room was small, lined with shelves of supplies. There was a tiny window high up on one wall, but no other exits. I sat on the floor, cradling Miley with one hand and holding the gun with the other, listening intently. I could hear muffled voices, then the attendant's voice getting louder. I couldn't make out exactly what was being said, but his tone was firm, authoritative. Then I heard him. Clearly, "I've got a shotgun pointed at you right now and the police are already on their way. They'll be here any minute. I suggest you leave immediately." There was silence, then the sound of a vehicle starting up and driving away. A few minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. Only then did I allow myself to break down, sobbing uncontrollably as the adrenaline crashed. The police arrived in force, 3 patrol cars. They took my statement, then escorted me back to my van to collect my belongings. The sight of my ransacked home on wheels, with the shattered window and my possessions thrown everywhere, brought a fresh wave of tears. The police were kind but businesslike, taking photos, looking for fingerprints, asking detailed questions about the men and the truck. They put me up in a hotel that night with an officer stationed in the hallway. The next morning, a detective came to take a more detailed statement. They never found the men or the truck. The detective suggested they might have been looking for drug money or valuables, thinking a woman alone would be an easy target. But something about the way they searched, how methodical they were, has always made me wonder if there was more to it. It's been 8 months now. I sold the van. I couldn't bear to keep it, even after getting the window fixed. Miley and I live in a small apartment now. She still has nightmares sometimes, making these horrible distressed sounds in her sleep. So do I. I haven't been back to Vermont or anywhere near the Appalachians. I haven't gone on another trip. Sometimes I wonder if I ever will again. That feeling of freedom I once had feels stolen from me now. I just wanted to share this as a warning. Trust your instincts. Trust your pets when they act strangely. And maybe don't camp alone in remote places, no matter how experienced you think you are. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't hidden when I did. I don't want to know, and I will forever be grateful to that gas station attendant whose name I never even learned. Whoever you are, thank you. Story 3. I've been driving trucks for about 15 years now. It's a lonely job sometimes, but I've always liked the solitude, the freedom of the open road. Up until last month, I'd never had any problems I couldn't handle with a cup of coffee and some loud music. But what happened that night? I still can't explain it. I'm not even sure I should be writing this down, but I need to tell someone. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. It was a Thursday night, or I guess technically Friday morning, around 2 a.m. I was hauling a load of electronics from Pittsburgh to Columbus, running behind schedule because of construction earlier in the day. My dispatcher was riding my ass about delivery times, so I decided to push through instead of stopping for the night. The stretch of highway I was on was completely deserted. I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 45 minutes. I remember feeling that heavy-eyed fatigue creeping in. You know the feeling, when your eyelids feel like they're made of lead and your mind starts playing tricks on you. I had the window cracked open despite the cold and the radio cranked up. Some classic rock station was playing Don't Fear the Reaper, which seems really messed up now when I think about it. That's when I saw him, standing on the shoulder with his thumb out. A young guy, maybe mid-20s, wearing a faded jean jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. I almost didn't stop. I have a strict policy about not picking up hitchhikers. In 15 years of driving, I've never broken that rule. Something about this guy made me pull over though. Maybe it was because it was so damn cold out, or maybe because there wasn't anything around for miles. Whatever it was, I slowed my rig and pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of him. Through my side mirror, I watched him jog up to the passenger side. When he stepped into the pool of my headlights, I noticed how pale he looked, sickly almost, with these dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. I leaned over and unlocked the door, and he climbed in. "Thanks for stopping," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Didn't think anyone would come by tonight." "Where you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the empty highway. He just shrugged and said, "Anywhere, just needed to get away." That should have been my first red flag. No specific destination. Who just stands on a highway in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning without knowing where they're going? But I was tired, and I figured having someone to talk to might help keep me awake. We drove in silence for a while, and it wasn't a comfortable silence. It felt heavy, like the air in the cab had gotten thicker somehow. I turned the heat up because it suddenly felt colder, even though the temperature gauge hadn't changed. "You drive this route often?" he finally asked, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Few times a month," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Why?" He turned to look at me then, and I swear his eyes looked different than they had before, darker somehow. "You ever see things out here? Things you can't explain?" My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "This stretch of highway," he said, gesturing to the road ahead. "It's got a reputation among truckers, people disappearing, trucks found on the shoulder with no driver." I laughed nervously. "Never heard anything about that." "My brother was a trucker," he said, his voice dropping lower. 2 years ago, he was driving this exact route, middle of the night, just like now. He called his wife to say he was making good time, should be home for breakfast. Never made it. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry to hear that." They found his truck the next day, parked on the shoulder about 5 miles from here. Engine running, lights on, door locked from the inside, but no sign of him, not a trace. My mouth went dry. People don't just vanish. "That's what I thought too," he said, "until they never found him. Not a single clue. It's like he just evaporated." I was starting to seriously regret picking this guy up. The way he was talking, it was freaking me out. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't just kick him out. "Your brother's not the only one," he continued. "There've been others. Always on this stretch. Always late at night. Always alone." "Look, buddy," I started to say, but then I saw them. Headlights in the distance coming toward us. Only they were on our side of the highway. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, flashing my high beams. The approaching vehicle didn't slow down or move over. It was heading straight for us, picking up speed. "Watch out," the hitchhiker shouted. I swerved hard to the right, nearly running off the road as I tried to avoid a head-on collision. The truck fishtailed and I fought the wheel, desperately trying to maintain control. The approaching headlights got brighter and brighter, blinding me completely. And then, this is the part I still can't wrap my head around, the lights passed through us. Not around us, not over us, through us. Like they weren't solid at all, like we weren't solid. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop on the shoulder, my heart practically beating out of my chest. When I looked in my rear-view mirror, there was nothing there. No taillights, no other vehicle. The road behind us was completely empty. "Did you see that?" I gasped, turning to the passenger seat. "What the hell was—" The seat was empty. The hitchhiker was gone. I froze, my hands still gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I looked around the cab frantically. Nothing. I checked the sleeper berth behind me. Empty. The passenger door was still locked from the inside. There was absolutely no way he could have gotten out without me noticing, especially not while I was fighting to control the truck. My whole body was shaking as I sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated a passenger? But it had felt so real. His voice, the cold he brought into the cab with him, the way the seat had compressed under his weight. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just breathing, trying to pull myself together. Then I started driving again, faster than I should have, desperate to get to some place with lights and people. About 30 miles down the road, I found a truck stop. I pulled in and parked, then practically ran inside to the diner section. There were a few other drivers there, nursing coffees and picking at late-night meals. The fluorescent lighting and normal conversation should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I ordered coffee and sat at the counter, my hands still trembling slightly as I lifted the mug. The waitress, an older woman with dyed red hair, gave me a concerned look. "You all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I nearly spilled my coffee. "I'm fine," I lied, "just tired." As I sat there, I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the door opened, I jumped. Every shadow in the corner of my eye made my heart race. I pulled out my phone and started searching for news about missing truckers on that stretch of highway. At first, I found nothing, but then I came across an old local news article. 2 years ago, a trucker named Mark Wilkins had disappeared while driving overnight from Pittsburgh to Columbus. His truck was found on the shoulder, engine running, doors locked, no signs of struggle. No trace of him was ever found. The article included a photo of the missing driver with his family. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The missing trucker looked exactly like the hitchhiker I'd picked up. I didn't sleep at all that night. I called my dispatcher and told him I was sick, couldn't make the delivery. He was pissed, but I didn't care. I waited at that truck stop until daylight, then took back roads all the way to Columbus, avoiding that stretch of highway completely. It's been a month now. I've tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I can't stop thinking about what the hitchhiker said, about drivers disappearing on that road. The worst part is, I've been assigned that route again next week. My dispatcher won't let me switch. Says it's the most direct route, and with fuel costs what they are, we can't afford the extra miles of a detour. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose my job, but I can't go back there. Not at night, not alone. And even now, sitting in my apartment writing this, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that whatever was out there on that highway followed me home. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see someone in a faded jean jacket and baseball cap. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. The thing that haunts me most is wondering what would have happened if those headlights hadn't appeared when they did. Would I have vanished too? Was the hitchhiker trying to warn me or lure me into something worse? I don't have answers. All I know is that something is out there on that lonely stretch of highway, something that doesn't belong in this world, and I think it's waiting for me to come back. Story 4. When I first moved here last spring, I thought this small town would be perfect. Property was cheap, the surrounding forest was beautiful, and I needed a fresh start after my divorce. I found a decent fixer-upper on the edge of town, close enough to walk to the general store, but far enough that I had some privacy and space. The locals were friendly enough at first, but I noticed how they'd exchange these weird looks whenever I mentioned exploring the woods or hiking trails. I remember my first week here, I was at Crawford's general store picking up some supplies, and I asked the owner, Bill, about trails in the area. "There's plenty of good hiking around here," he said, bagging my groceries. "Just stick to the marked paths on the east side of the forest." When I asked about the western trails, the store went quiet. Bill's face changed and he just shook his head. "We don't go that way, not since the 80s. I thought it was just small-town superstition. You know how these places are. They build up their local legends, probably to keep the kids from wandering too far." Over the next few months, I kept hearing whispers about the Watcher and an old cabin deep in the western woods. Every time I'd press for details, people would clam up or change the subject. Sarah at the coffee shop finally gave me something concrete after I'd been a regular for a few months. The story goes that there was an old hermit who lived out there decades ago, she said, keeping her voice low. People say he made a deal with something in those woods, something not human. Now he's trapped there, and he lures people in for the Watcher. I laughed it off. So this Watcher is what exactly? Some kind of forest spirit? She didn't laugh back. Nobody knows. Nobody who's seen it has ever been able to describe it. They either don't come back or they come back different. I asked if anyone had actually disappeared, thinking I'd catch her in the exaggeration, but she nodded solemnly. 3 teenagers in 1984. They went out there on a dare. Only one came back, and he never spoke again. Just stared and drooled until he died in the state hospital 10 years later. I'd heard enough versions of this story by September that I was honestly getting annoyed. It felt like the whole town was in on this elaborate joke to scare the newcomer. Even my neighbor Tom, who seemed like the most rational guy in town, warned me to stay away from the western forest. "I'm not saying I believe all the Watcher nonsense," he told me one evening as we shared beers on my porch. "But something ain't right out there. The animals don't go there. No birds singing, no deer tracks, nothing. It's just empty." October came, and with it the most beautiful fall colors I'd ever seen. I'd been working from home as a graphic designer, and I was feeling cooped up. The autumn weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, with that crisp smell in the air. I decided that I'd had enough of the town's superstitious bullshit. I was going to explore the western forest and take some photos, maybe even find this haunted cabin and post pictures online to show everyone how ridiculous they were being. On October 23rd, I packed a small backpack with water, some trail mix, a flashlight, and my camera. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. It was around 2 in the afternoon when I set out, giving myself plenty of time to explore and get back before dark. I remember checking my watch before entering the tree line, thinking I'd give myself until 5 p.m. at the latest. The eastern forests I'd hiked before were alive with sound. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the occasional scurrying of small animals. But as soon as I crossed over to the western side, following a barely visible old trail, everything went quiet. At first, I thought it was just the wind changing direction or something, but after about 20 minutes of hiking, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird call. No rustling, no movement at all, except my own footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. I'm not a superstitious person, but that silence was unsettling. I almost turned back then. I wish I had. Instead, I pressed on, telling myself it was just coincidence. Maybe this part of the forest had different wildlife patterns. Maybe there was a natural explanation for why it felt so still and empty. The trees seemed to grow thicker here, blocking more of the sunlight. The temperature felt like it dropped a few degrees, though that could have been my imagination. After about an hour of hiking, I checked my watch, 4:15 p.m. The sun would start setting soon, and I was thinking about heading back when I spotted something through the trees, a faint yellowish light flickering in the distance. It had to be the cabin. I felt a rush of excitement, thinking I'd finally solve the mystery and have proof that there was nothing supernatural going on, just an old abandoned building that had spawned decades of local folklore. I followed that light, which seemed to stay the same distance away no matter how long I walked toward it. It was disorienting, and I started to wonder if I was going in circles. My watch said 4:45 p.m. when I finally broke through a dense patch of underbrush and found myself in a small clearing. There it was, the cabin. It looked exactly like something from a horror movie. Weathered gray wood, a sagging roof with missing shingles, broken windows patched with what looked like animal hides. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Despite its decrepit state, there was definitely light coming from inside, a flickering, uneven glow that looked like candlelight. I stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes, just staring at it. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around, but my stubborn pride wouldn't let me. I'd come all this way to prove the town wrong. I needed to at least peek inside, take a few photos, and then I could leave with my evidence. I approached slowly, my boots crunching dead leaves and twigs. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of the forest. As I got closer, I noticed other details, strange symbols carved into the doorframe, small animal bones hanging from strings on the porch, a rocking chair that seemed to move. Slightly despite there being no breeze, I told myself it was all just props. Some local kids probably came out here to scare each other, adding creepy elements to fuel the legend. The rocking chair was just sitting on an uneven porch. There were rational explanations for everything. I took out my camera and snapped some photos of the exterior. When I checked the preview screen, the images were strangely blurred, as if something had moved during the exposure. I tried again with the same results. "Piece of crap," I muttered, shoving the camera back in my bag. I'd have to use my phone instead. The cabin door was partially open, revealing a slice of the dimly lit interior. I pushed it gently with my fingertips, and it swung inward with a low, pained creak. The smell hit me immediately, musty decay mixed with something sweet and rotten, like meat gone bad. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped inside. The interior was a single room with a few pieces of dilapidated furniture. A table with one broken leg, a chair, a shelf with dusty jars containing unidentifiable objects, and in the far corner, a bed. There was someone on the bed. My heart nearly stopped. I froze in place, one foot still hovering above the floor. The figure was sitting upright, facing the wall. It looked like a man, but impossibly thin, skeletal, with pale skin stretched so tight over the bones that I could see the outline of his skull. His hair was sparse and white, hanging in stringy patches. I should have run. I should have turned and bolted right then. But some morbid fascination kept me rooted there, unable to look away. Was this some elaborate mannequin left to scare trespassers, a Halloween decoration? Then it turned its head. Not its whole body, just its head, rotating nearly 180 degrees to look at me. Its face was barely human, hollow cheeks, skin like yellowed parchment, eye sockets so deep they seemed empty until I caught a glimpse of something wet and reflective. Deep within them, its mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing blackened, rotting teeth. "I've been waiting for you, David," it said in a voice like dry leaves rustling. Not shouting, not whispering, just a normal conversational tone that somehow made it even more terrifying. It knew my name. How did it know my name? I stumbled backward, my body finally responding to the panic flooding through me. My back hit the door, which had somehow closed behind me. I fumbled for the handle, not taking my eyes off the thing on the bed, which was now slowly turning its entire body to face me. Its movements were wrong, jerky but fluid at the same time, like a spider. "The Watcher won't let you leave," it said, still with that terrible smile. "The Watcher has chosen you." I yanked on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The thing was standing now, its body impossibly tall and thin, joints bending at unnatural angles. It took a step toward me, bare feet making wet, sticking sounds on the wooden floor. "Who's there with you?" it asked, head tilting at an impossible angle. "I can sense them. The Watcher sees them too." I was alone. I was completely alone. But the way it was looking past me, beside me, made me feel like something else was in the room with us. I couldn't look. I didn't dare take my eyes off the approaching figure. In desperation, I remembered a small window I'd seen on the side of the cabin. I lunged away from the door, scrambling across the room. The thing moved with shocking speed, bony fingers grabbing at my jacket. I felt fabric tear as I pulled away. The window was tiny, maybe 2 feet square, but I was running on pure adrenaline. I smashed it with my elbow, barely feeling the glass cut into my skin. I tried to climb through, pushing my upper body out into the cool evening air. Something grabbed my ankle. The grip was like iron, impossibly strong for those skeletal fingers. I kicked wildly, connecting with something solid. I heard a cracking sound, like dry wood breaking, and the grip loosened just enough. I pushed through the window, falling face first onto the ground outside. Without looking back, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran like I've never run before, crashing through underbrush. branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction. I just ran. The forest was getting darker as the sun set. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see that skeletal figure pursuing me. But there was nothing except shadows and trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, not the thing from the cabin, but something else. Something I couldn't see. Something that was watching. I don't know how long I ran or how I found my way back. The next thing I clearly remember is collapsing on my front porch, my lungs burning, blood from various cuts soaking into my clothes. I crawled inside and locked every door and window in my house. I sat in my bathroom with the lights on all night, a kitchen knife in my hand, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. In the morning, Tom found me still sitting there, staring at the door. He'd come to check on me when he noticed my front door standing open. I must have forgotten to close it properly in my panic. I told him what happened. I had to tell someone. He listened without interrupting, his face growing more concerned. When I finished, he just nodded and said he was going to call some people. A group of townsmen went out to the cabin that afternoon. Tom came back to tell me what they'd found. Nothing. The cabin was empty. No skeletal man, no furniture, not even the candles that had provided the light I'd seen. Just an empty, rotting shell of a building that looked like it hadn't been occupied in decades. They did find one thing. My camera, which I hadn't even realized I'd lost in my escape. When they checked the photos, there was nothing but blurry images of an empty cabin, interior. It's been 3 months now. I'm still in Ashbrook, though I'm planning to move as soon as I can sell the house. The cuts and bruises healed, but I haven't been the same since that night. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, especially at night. Sometimes I see movement from the corner of my eye, a tall, thin shadow that vanishes when I turn to look at it directly. The locals don't talk to me about the cabin anymore. They just give me these knowing, pitying looks. I've overheard whispers when they think I can't hear. The Watcher got him too. I don't know what happened in those woods. I don't know if what I saw was real or if I somehow hallucinated the whole thing. All I know is that sometimes late at night I hear a voice like dry leaves rustling, saying my name from the darkness beyond my window. And I know, deep in my soul, that something followed me back from that cabin. Something that's still watching me, even now. Story 5. I still can't sleep. It's been 3 days since it happened, and I'm writing this from my friend's apartment because I can't bear to be alone. Maybe putting it all down will help make sense of it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I don't know. I moved to Maplewood about a month ago for my junior year at Westfield College. I'm studying environmental science, and the forests around here were actually part of why I transferred. The campus is gorgeous, but the town itself is small and honestly pretty boring. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business. During orientation week, a group of us were hanging out in the common room when someone mentioned driving routes around town. This guy Mike warned me about avoiding the lonely road at night. The way everyone nodded solemnly made me roll my eyes internally. I grew up in Chicago. I know what actual danger looks like, not some small-town superstition about a creepy road. "What's the deal with this road?" I asked, expecting some lame urban legend. "It's this narrow back road through the woods that connects the north end of town to the east side," Mike explained. "Technically it saves like 15 minutes, but nobody uses it after dark." Jenna, who'd been quiet, added, "My cousin's friend disappeared on that road 2 years ago. They found his car but never found him." I nodded politely, but thought to myself how ridiculous it all sounded. Classic small-town folklore designed to scare newcomers. I figured there was probably a rational explanation. Maybe the road was poorly lit and had sharp turns, leading to accidents that got mythologized over time. Fast forward to this past Friday night. I was at this house party at Tyler's place on the north side of town. It wasn't anything special, just music, cheap beer, and people I barely knew. By around midnight, I was tired and had an early shift at the campus coffee shop the next morning. When I mentioned I was heading out, Tyler looked concerned. You know how to get back to campus from here, right? Don't take the lonely road. Yeah, I know. The spooky road that eats people, I joked. Google Maps says it's 15 minutes faster. Seriously, Sarah, he said, suddenly looking very sober. Just take the main road. It's only 10 minutes longer. I nodded, pretending to agree, but had absolutely no intention of adding extra time to my drive. It was just a road through the woods. I'd driven through plenty of dark country roads before. The night was unusually cold for September. I remember getting into my car and cranking up the heat, thinking it was strange how quickly the temperature had dropped after sunset. The roads were empty as I pulled away from the neighborhood. My GPS prompted me to turn onto Oak Ridge Lane, the official name of what locals called the Lonely Road. The entrance was easy to miss, just a narrow break in the trees with a faded street sign. As soon as I turned onto it, the temperature seemed to drop even further. I actually checked to make sure my heat was still on. It was cranked to 75, but I could see my breath fogging inside the car. The road was worse than I expected, barely wide enough for my compact car, with cracked pavement and no lines or reflectors. The trees on either side were massive old-growth pines and oaks that formed a dense canopy overhead, blocking out any moonlight. My headlights created this tunnel effect that was disorienting, like the road kept stretching forward without end. About 5 minutes in, my radio started acting up. I'd been listening to my usual late-night talk show, but it gradually degraded into static. I tried changing stations, but every frequency was the same harsh white noise. I switched it off, and the silence felt somehow heavier than the static had been. That's when I first saw her. Just a quick glimpse at the edge of my headlights. A woman standing among the trees wearing what looked like a white dress or nightgown. She wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the road. I slowed down instinctively, thinking maybe it was someone who needed help, but as my car approached, there was nobody there. I blamed it on being tired. Maybe it was just the way the light hit a tree trunk or something, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness that settled over me. The forest felt alive somehow, like it was watching me. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. The GPS said I had about 3 more miles to go before reaching the main road on the other side. But those 3 miles seemed to stretch endlessly. I drove for what felt like 20 minutes without seeing any sign of the forest thinning or the road widening. Then my car started acting weird. The headlights dimmed slightly, and the engine made this struggling sound even though I wasn't going uphill. The temperature inside the car plummeted again. The windows began fogging up so badly I had to turn the defrost on max and wipe the windshield with my sleeve. That's when I saw her again. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road about 50 feet ahead. The same woman, pale, with long dark hair and a white dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. I slammed on my brakes, but they felt mushy, like there was air in the line. The car skidded and I yanked the wheel hard to avoid hitting her. Everything happened so fast. My car spun, the tires lost traction, and I went careening off the road. I remember the sickening crunch as the front end hit a tree, and my head snapped forward into the deploying airbag. The pain was instant and blinding. When I came to, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No insects, no wind in the trees, nothing. My headlights were still on, but dimmer, casting weak light into the fog that had somehow gotten thicker. The airbag had deflated, leaving white powder all over my clothes. My forehead throbbed where it had hit, and I could feel something warm trickling down my temple. I fumbled for my phone. No signal, of course. The screen said it was 12:45 a.m., meaning I'd only been out for a few minutes. I tried the engine, but it just clicked weakly. Something was damaged in the crash. I knew I needed to get back to the road and flag down another car, or at least start walking toward town. But when I climbed out and looked around, I couldn't see the road anymore. I was only about 20 feet into the trees. I should have been able to see the pavement easily. Instead, there were just more trees in every direction. I used my phone's flashlight and started walking in what I thought was the direction of the road, but after several minutes of pushing through underbrush, there was still no sign of it. That's when the panic really set in. I called out, hoping maybe someone would hear me, but my voice seemed to die in the fog, like the air itself was swallowing the sound. I turned back toward my car. At least I could wait there until morning, but I couldn't see its lights anymore. Somehow, in just minutes of walking, I'd lost sight of my only landmark. I tried to remain calm, telling myself the road couldn't be far. I picked a direction and walked determinedly, keeping my phone flashlight pointed ahead. The trees all looked the same, ancient, gnarled trunks with low-hanging branches that seemed to reach out like arms. The ground was a tangle of roots and fallen branches that kept catching my feet. That's when I heard it, my name, whispered from somewhere in the darkness behind me. Sarah. I whipped around, the flashlight beam cutting through the fog but illuminating nothing but more trees. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Then again, from a different direction. Sarah. It wasn't a shout for help or a search party calling my name. It was a whisper, intimate, like someone standing right next to my ear. I started running then, no longer caring about finding the road, just wanting to get away from that voice. The forest seemed to close in around me. Branches clawed at my face and arms. Roots rose up to trip me. I was sobbing now, gasping for breath as I ran blindly through the trees. My phone light bounced wildly, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees casting them. I don't know how long I ran before my foot caught on something and I went sprawling. My phone flew from my hand, the light spinning crazily before going out as it hit something hard. I lay there in the pitch darkness, the taste of dirt and blood in my mouth, too terrified to move. The cold intensified. I could feel it seeping through my clothes into my skin like the ground beneath me was made of ice. And then I felt, rather than saw, someone standing over me. I rolled onto my back and looked up. She was there, the woman in white, looming above me. In the darkness, I couldn't make out her features clearly, except for her eyes, completely black, like empty sockets, but somehow still seeing me. Her hair hung down around her pale face, and her dress moved slightly even though there was no wind. "You belong here now, Sarah," she whispered, her voice somehow both distant and right inside my head. "They all do, eventually." I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror, and scrambled backward. My hand found my phone, and I frantically turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but she was gone. I got to my feet and ran again. No direction, no plan, just blind panic. I don't remember much after that, just running, falling, getting up, running more. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the fear kept me moving. At some point, I saw lights in the distance, actual electric lights, and ran toward them like my life depended on it. I burst out of the forest onto a road, not the lonely road, but the main highway that runs along the eastern edge of town. A truck driver found me stumbling along the shoulder at around 5 in the morning, covered in dirt and blood from dozens of scratches. He called an ambulance. At the hospital, they treated me for mild hypothermia, a concussion, and dehydration. When I told the police what happened, they sent a search party to find my car. They found it exactly where I described crashing, just off the lonely road, about 2 miles in from the north entrance. According to them, the road was right there, clearly visible, maybe 15 feet from my car, but that's impossible. I swear I looked everywhere. I swear the road vanished, and the officer who took my statement had this look in his eyes, not disbelief, but something worse, recognition, like he'd heard it all before. They say I must have gotten disoriented after the crash and wandered in circles, that the woman I saw was a hallucination from the concussion, that the voice was just the wind in the trees. But I know what I experienced. I know what I heard. And I know that somehow that road let me go when it could have kept me forever. The mechanic says my car is totaled. I don't care. I'm never driving again, especially not in this town. And if you're ever passing through Maplewood, please take the long way around. No matter what your GPS tells you, no matter how late it is, stay off the lonely road. Because something's waiting there in the dark, and not everyone gets to leave. Story 6. I've been driving big rigs for nearly 15 years now, but what happened last summer still keeps me up at night. I'm sharing this because I was almost victim number 9, and the details of how I escaped haven't been in any news reports. It was July 16th, 2011, just a week after that poor guy Darren Wilkins was found dead at Ocotillo. The news hadn't really broken widely yet, just some whispers on the CB about a trucker getting killed out in Arizona. Most of us figured it was probably a robbery gone wrong. I was hauling a load of electronics from San Diego to Houston, making good time until I hit some construction outside of Tucson that set me back a couple hours. By the time I crossed into New Mexico, I was pushing up against my hours and needed to stop. I've always preferred actual truck stops with restaurants and showers, but I was too tired to make it to Lordsburg proper, so I pulled into the westbound rest area about 20 miles shy of town. It was around 11:30 at night when I parked. The place was about half full, maybe 8 or 9 trucks scattered around, most dark with their drivers already asleep. I remember noticing a white panel van parked near the restrooms, which seemed odd for that time of night. Usually it's just trucks and the occasional family in an RV at these places after dark. I logged my stop in my logbook, shut down the engine, and climbed into the sleeper to catch some Z's. I've always been a light sleeper on the road, a survival instinct in this business, so when I heard a light tap on my driver's side door around 1:15 in the morning, I was instantly awake. At first, I thought it might be another driver with an emergency or maybe a highway patrolman doing a welfare check. I peeked through the curtain and saw a middle-aged guy with glasses wearing what looked like a polo shirt with some kind of logo on it. He was holding what appeared to be a clipboard and had a lanyard with an ID badge around his neck. Looked professional enough. I cracked my window instead of opening the door, another habit that probably saved my life. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man smiled apologetically. "Sorry to bother you so late, sir. I'm with Tri-State Security Solutions." He flashed the badge hanging from his neck, but it was too dark to really read it. "We're doing a safety outreach program for truckers along I-10 after the recent incident in Arizona, offering free security consultations and discounted alarm systems." Now I was tired and annoyed at being woken up, but something about this guy just felt off. Why would a security company be approaching truckers in the middle of the night? And his van, which I now realized was the white one I'd seen earlier, didn't have any company logos that I could see. "It's pretty late for sales calls," I said. "Oh, we're not selling tonight," he said quickly. "Just introducing ourselves and scheduling appointments for our Lordsburg office tomorrow. Plus, we're giving out these complimentary personal safety whistles to all the drivers we meet." He held up a small yellow whistle. "Mind if I come up and show you some literature about what happened in Ocotillo? It's important information for your safety." That's when my blood ran cold. How did he know specific details about what happened in Ocotillo? The news reports had been vague, just that a trucker was found dead. Nothing about the location. I kept my voice steady. "I appreciate it, but I'm logged out for the night. Maybe catch me in the morning." His friendly demeanor changed subtly. His smile remained, but his eyes, they went hard. "It'll just take 5 minutes. I can show you where the other driver went wrong. Simple mistakes that cost him his life." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I've dealt with lot lizards, would-be thieves, and all sorts of characters in my years on the road, but this guy radiated something different, something predatory. "I'm good, thanks," I said firmly. "Have a good night." I started to roll my window up. He placed his hand on the glass. "You sure? It could save your life." The way he emphasized "could" made it sound like a threat. I reached under my seat where I keep a tire thumper, basically a short, heavy club we use to check tire pressure. "I said good night," I repeated, making sure he saw what I was holding. He backed up a step, hands raised in a placating gesture. "No problem, sir. Just trying to help. Sleep safe." He gave me this weird little smile and walked away, back toward his van. I didn't go back to sleep. I watched through my side mirror as he walked slowly through the rest area, approaching another truck across the lot. This time, the driver opened his door. I saw them talking for a minute, then the security guy handed him something small, probably one of those whistles, and walked away without going inside the truck. For the next hour, I watched him approach 3 more trucks. 2 drivers turned him away, but one let him climb up into his cab. After about 10 minutes, he climbed back down and returned to his van. I couldn't see if he had given that driver a whistle or not. By this point, it was almost 3 in the morning, and something felt seriously wrong. I decided to trust my gut. I started my truck, got on the CB, and broadcast on Channel 19. Heads up drivers at the westbound Lordsburg rest area. Anybody else get approached by a security guy in a white van selling alarms? Something ain't right about him. There was silence for a moment, then a female voice came on. This is eastbound Elena heading into Lordsburg. We got a bolo yesterday about a suspicious person approaching truckers at rest stops. Apparently that trucker in Arizona was murdered. They think it might be targeted. My heart nearly stopped. Murdered? Not just robbed or killed in a struggle, but murdered? I keyed up again. This guy's going truck to truck right now. White van, glasses, security badge, tried to give me a yellow whistle. There was dead silence on the CB for several seconds. Then Elena's voice, urgent now. Call 911 immediately. The Arizona victim had a yellow whistle placed in his hand. It was kept out of the news. I fumbled for my cell phone and dialed 911 while keeping my eyes on the white van. The guy was sitting in it now, engine off, just watching the lot. I gave the dispatcher all the details and was told officers were being dispatched. While waiting, I used the CB to alert the other drivers in the lot. Most of them started their engines, a clear sign that they were awake and alert. The van's headlights came on, and it slowly pulled out of its parking spot, heading for the exit. I made a split-second decision. I couldn't let this guy potentially escape to hurt someone else. I pulled my rig forward to block the exit lane. The van stopped about 50 feet away, its headlights shining on my truck. For what felt like an eternity, we just sat there in a standoff, his headlights glaring into my mirrors. Then his reverse lights came on. He backed up, swung around, and headed for the entrance ramp instead. I couldn't reposition fast enough to block him again, and he accelerated onto I-10 heading east toward Lordsburg. State police arrived about 15 minutes later. They took my statement and descriptions, then raced off after the van. I found out later that morning that they caught him at a gas station in Lordsburg. His name was Raymond Mercer, and when they searched his van, they found wire garrotes, those colored whistles, and a notebook with information about truckers' schedules and rest habits. What still haunts me is what I learned during the investigation. Mercer had a system. He'd approach trucks, offering security devices and those whistles. If drivers seemed cautious, like me only cracking the window, he'd move on. But if someone opened their door and seemed to live alone with no one expecting them, he'd try to get inside their cab. Once inside, he'd make his move. The whistles were his signature, a sick joke, like, "No one can hear you whistle for help." He'd place them in the victim's hands after killing them. 2 weeks after my encounter, Elena Vasquez, the same woman who had warned me on the CB that night, was found murdered in her truck at that very same rest area. She had a blue whistle in her hand. I've carried that guilt ever since. If I had done more that night, maybe followed up with her specifically. The investigation eventually connected Mercer to 8 trucker deaths across the Southwest. My encounter with him was one of the pieces that helped authorities understand his method and tracking system. I still drive the same routes, still haul the same loads, but I've changed how I operate. I never, ever stop at isolated rest areas after dark. I use well-lit truck stops with security cameras. I text my dispatcher my exact location whenever I stop. My truck now has additional locks, an alarm system, and a dash cam that runs even when I'm parked. But the most important change is one you can't see. I keep a small yellow whistle hanging from my rearview mirror. Not one of his. This one I bought myself. It's my reminder that trusting my instincts that night saved my life. Because the truth is, out on the road, sometimes you're completely alone with the darkness and whatever's hiding in it. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that soft tap on my door, and I wonder about the drivers who heard that same tap, opened their doors, and were handed a whistle, never knowing it would be the last thing they'd ever hold. Story 7. I still can't believe what happened to me last Friday night. I've been sitting here for hours trying to find the right words, but there's no right way to explain something like this. I haven't slept properly in days. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. Those eyes. God, those eyes. It was around 11:30 at night and I was driving back from my friend's birthday dinner in Clarksville. It's about a 2-hour drive back to my place, and I was already exhausted from a long work week. I should have just crashed at my friend's place like she offered, but I had promised to feed my neighbor's cat the next morning, so I decided to power through and drive home. The highway was unusually empty that night. I mean, it was a Friday, so you'd expect at least some traffic, but there was literally no one else on the road. Just the occasional flicker of my headlights catching the reflectors on the guardrails. My radio kept cutting in and out, nothing but static, so I turned it off and drove in silence. The moon was full, casting this eerie bluish glow across the landscape. About 45 minutes into the drive, I noticed something on the side of the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a road sign I hadn't noticed before, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A man standing perfectly still with his thumb out. Now, I'm not stupid. I've seen enough true crime documentaries to know you don't pick up hitchhikers, especially not when you're a woman driving alone at night. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was how isolated the area was. Nothing but fields and forest for miles. Or maybe it was the dropping temperature outside. The dashboard thermometer read 37 degrees, and this guy was just standing there. As my headlights illuminated him fully, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was tall, unnaturally tall, like well over 6 feet, and rail thin. He wore this old-fashioned dark coat that hung from his frame like it was on a clothes hanger. But it was his face that really got to me. Pale doesn't even begin to describe it. His skin had this waxy, grayish quality, like someone who's been sick for a very long time. And his eyes... they were deeply sunken into his face, creating these dark hollows that made it hard to see his actual eyes. I don't know why, but I pulled over. I still ask myself why I did that. There was something compelling about him, like when you see something disturbing and can't look away. My hand reached for the window button before my brain could stop it. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. He didn't respond at first, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then, very slowly, he nodded and walked toward my car. His movements were stiff, like his joints weren't working quite right. When he opened the passenger door, the interior light came on, and I got a better look at his face. His lips were colorless, almost blue, and his cheeks were sunken in. He looked malnourished, but not in a normal way, more like someone who hadn't eaten in months. He folded himself into the passenger seat, his knees almost touching the dashboard despite how far back the seat was. I noticed his hands were bare despite the cold, and they looked wrong. The fingers were too long, the knuckles too pronounced. The nails had a bluish tint. "Thanks for stopping," he said, and his voice sent another wave of chills through me. It was raspy and dry, like sandpaper on wood, with this weird hollow quality to it, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. I nodded, unable to form words for a moment, then pulled back onto the highway. The silence in the car was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, the sound of the tires on the asphalt, and nothing else. He didn't breathe loudly. In fact, I couldn't hear him breathing at all. After about 10 minutes of this unbearable silence, I couldn't take it anymore. "So, where are you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the panic building in my chest. He turned his head toward me, the movement so slow it made my skin crawl. "I'm going home," he replied in that same raspy, cold voice. "And where's home?" I pressed, desperate to break the tension. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was yellowed and crumpled, like it had been folded and unfolded countless times. He handed it to me without a word. I glanced down at it quickly, trying to keep my eyes on the road. At first, I thought it was a newspaper clipping or maybe directions. But as I caught glimpses of it under the passing streetlights, I realized with growing horror that it was an obituary. There was a small, grainy photo at the top, a man with the same gaunt features as my passenger. The text below gave his name, Thomas Allen Ridgway, born March 15th, 1972, died October 18th, 2013. October 18th. That was today's date, exactly 10 years ago. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly drove off the road. I pulled my eyes away from the paper and looked at the passenger seat. The words, "This can't be happening," repeating in my head like a broken record. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt on the empty highway. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I looked wildly around the car. There was no sign of him. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound. He had simply vanished. But the obituary was still clutched in my trembling hand. I sat there for what felt like hours, the car idling on the shoulder of the road, trying to process what had just happened. I told myself I must have imagined him. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. But the obituary was real. I could feel its texture. Between my fingers, see the faded print. According to the clipping, Thomas Ridgway had died in a car accident on this very highway 10 years ago to the day. He had been walking home after his car broke down. Eventually, I managed to calm myself enough to continue driving. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept checking the passenger seat every few seconds, half expecting him to reappear. The obituary lay on the dashboard where I'd tossed it, a tangible reminder that I wasn't losing my mind. I was still about 40 minutes from home, and every mile felt like an eternity. I kept the interior light on, too afraid of the dark, and cranked the heat up despite being drenched in cold sweat. The radio remained silent. I couldn't bear to hear static again. About 20 minutes later, I glanced up at my rearview mirror to check for traffic, a pointless habit. There was still no one else on the road, and my heart literally stopped for a second. He was in my back seat. Those hollow eyes stared directly into mine through the mirror. His face was even paler than before, the skin now taking on a greenish-gray hue that reminded me of bodies I'd seen at funeral viewings. His lips moved, forming the words, "I'm going home," once more, though no sound came out. I screamed and swerved, nearly hitting the guardrail. When I looked back at the mirror, the back seat was empty, but the smell remained, a horrible, sickly, sweet odor of decay that filled the car completely. It was the unmistakable smell of death, like roadkill that's been baking in the sun for days. I retched, rolling down all the windows despite the freezing air outside. I drove the rest of the way home at nearly 90 miles per hour, tears streaming down my face, the cold air whipping through the car but doing nothing to dispel that awful smell. I kept checking the mirror, the passenger seat, looking over my shoulder every few seconds. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there with the engine running for several minutes, too terrified to get out. The obituary was still on the dashboard. With shaking hands, I picked it up again, reading it more carefully this time. The details were sparse. Thomas Ridgway, 41, died in a pedestrian accident on Highway 37 after his vehicle broke down. No family mentioned, no friends quoted. Just a small, forgotten death notice that somehow found its way into my car a decade later. I finally worked up the courage to go inside, clutching my keys between my fingers like a weapon, checking every room, every closet under the bed, anywhere someone could hide. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept the lights on and sat with my back against the wall, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. It's been almost a week now. I've told no one about what happened. Who would believe me? I called in sick to work on Monday, unable to face the world. I've been researching Thomas Ridgway obsessively, but there's almost nothing to find. Just that same obituary in the digital archives of the local paper. No social media presence, no other news stories. It's like he barely existed even before he died. The obituary is still here. I've thought about burning it, but something stops me every time I try. What if destroying it somehow makes things worse? What if he comes back, angry that I've destroyed his only connection to this world? I don't know what he wanted from me. Was I just a random driver who happened to stop? Or was there something specific about me that drew him to the side of the road that night? Was he trying to warn me about something? Or was he trying to take me with him? All I know is that I won't drive that highway again. I won't drive alone at night anywhere. And every time I look in my rearview mirror, I'm terrified I'll see those hollow eyes staring back at me, silently mouthing those words that haunt my dreams. I'm going home. The smell of decay still lingers in my car. No amount of air freshener seems to get rid of it. And sometimes when I'm about to fall asleep, I swear I can hear that raspy voice whispering in my ear, so close I can feel the cold breath on my skin. Always the same message, over and over. I think I understand now. He wasn't trying to go to his home. He was trying to go to mine. Story 8. I've been a trucker for almost 23 years now. You spend that much time on the road, you're bound to see some weird stuff. Wildlife darting across the highway, drunk drivers swerving between lanes at 2 in the morning, even the occasional meteor lighting up the night sky. But what happened to me last year on Highway 93 in Nevada? I still can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to. For those who don't know, us truckers call that stretch the highway to hell. Not because it's particularly dangerous driving-wise, though it has its moments, but because of how isolated it is. Miles and miles of nothing but desert scrub and distant mountains. No streetlights, hardly any gas stations, and your radio starts cutting out about an hour in. Cell service is spotty at best. It's just you, your headlights, and whatever's lurking in the darkness beyond. It was a Tuesday night in late October, just a regular haul. I was carrying a load of electronics from Idaho down to a distribution center in Vegas. Nothing special, nothing that would make me a target for hijackers or anything like that. Just another job. I'd made this run dozens of times before without incident. That night I'd been driving since about noon. The sun had set around 6, and I'd been pushing through the darkness for hours. My GPS said I was about 3 hours out from Vegas. The clock on my dash read 11:32 when I first saw her. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. When you've been staring at the same unchanging road for hours, your mind starts to fill in the blanks sometimes. But as my headlights swept across the figure at the side of the road, I realized it was definitely a woman. She was standing perfectly still, maybe 10 feet from the shoulder, wearing what looked like a white dress, long dark hair hanging down, covering most of her face. Now, picking up hitchhikers is against company policy, and even if it wasn't, I wouldn't have stopped. Something about her posture was wrong. She wasn't thumbing for a ride. She wasn't moving at all, just standing there, facing the road, as if she was waiting for something. I slowed down a bit as I passed her. Instinct, I guess. In my side mirror, I watched her figure recede into the darkness behind me. And then, between one blink and the next, she was gone. Just gone. There was nowhere for her to go out there. No car I could see, no buildings, nothing but open desert. I remember rubbing my eyes, thinking I must be more tired than I realized. Maybe it was time to find a rest stop, grab a few hours of sleep before continuing. I turned up the radio, cracked my window to let the cold air hit my face, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. About 10 minutes later, I nearly had a heart attack. There she was again, the same woman in white, standing directly in the middle of the road, maybe 100 yards ahead of me. This time, I got a better look as my high beams illuminated her. The white dress was torn at the hem, dirty and stained with something dark. Her bare feet were caked with dust, and her hair, it parted just enough that I could see one eye staring directly at me. I'll never forget that eye. It didn't look scared or confused like you'd expect from someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. It looked hungry. I slammed on my brakes, the load in my trailer shifting dangerously. 18 wheels locked up, and I could smell burning rubber as the truck skidded. I must have dropped from 65 to 30 in seconds, and I was sure I was going to hit her. There was no way she could move fast enough. But she didn't move at all. I laid on my horn, a long, desperate blast that should have startled anything with a pulse. She just kept staring, that one visible eye locked onto mine. I swear I could feel it, like fingers crawling into my brain. Then the strangest thing happened. As the gap between us closed to maybe 20 feet, she flickered, like an old TV with bad reception. And then she was gone. Not like she jumped out of the way or ran off the road. She was there, and then she wasn't. My truck finally shuddered to a complete stop, and I sat there, white-knuckling the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The highway stretched empty before me, illuminated only by my headlights. No woman, no footprints in the dust at the roadside. Nothing. I'm not ashamed to admit I was shaking. 23 years on the road, and I'd never experienced anything like that. I couldn't rationalize it away as a trick of the light or road fatigue. What I'd seen was too specific, too detailed. But it couldn't be real, could it? After sitting there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, I put the truck in gear and started moving again. But I kept my speed down to 45, my eyes scanning the road ahead obsessively. Every shadow, every piece of tumbleweight made me flinch. I kept checking my mirrors too, half expecting to see her in the cab behind me. The thought made my skin crawl. About 30 minutes later, I spotted the lights of a rest stop up ahead. I'd never been so happy to see civilization in my life. I pulled in, parked in the truckers section, and just sat there for a while, trying to get my breathing under control. Eventually, I decided I needed coffee and maybe another human being to talk to, just to ground myself back in reality. The rest stop was one of those old-school places that had been there since the 60s. A small diner attached to a gas station and mini-mart. This time, of night, it was nearly empty, just a couple of other trucks in the lot and a beat-up sedan that probably belonged to whoever was working. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. Behind the counter was an old man, had to be in his 70s at least, with leathery skin and eyes that had seen too much sun. He was wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. "Coffee?" he asked as I approached, already reaching for a mug. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. He filled the mug and slid it across to me. I must have looked pretty rough because he gave me a once-over and asked, "You all right, son? Look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't mean to tell him. Truckers are a superstitious bunch, but we don't go around admitting we've seen things that can't be explained. Bad for your reputation. But the words just tumbled out before I could stop them. "I saw a woman on the highway," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Standing in the middle of the road, white dress, dark hair covering her face. She disappeared right in front of me." The old man's hand froze mid-wipe. He looked at me for a long moment, and I prepared myself for the ridicule, the joke about me needing sleep or lay off the caffeine pills. Instead, he nodded slowly. "The woman in white," he said quietly. "You're not the first to see her out there. She's been haunting that stretch of 93 for decades." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What do you mean, haunting?" He leaned on the counter, lowering his voice even though we were the only ones there. "Story goes she was killed out there back in the 70s. Some say it was a car wreck. Her husband drove drunk, rolled their car. She was thrown out, died on the roadside while he walked away without a scratch." He paused, took a sip from his own coffee mug. "Others say she was murdered. Hitchhiking to Vegas, got picked up by the wrong kind of driver. He did what he did, then dumped her body out there in the desert." "Why is she standing in the road?" I asked, not entirely sure I wanted to know the answer. "Some think she's looking for her husband. wanting revenge for what he did. Others say she's warning drivers to be careful on that road. Or maybe he hesitated. Maybe she's looking for a ride to finish her journey, or looking for someone else to join her out there. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. What happens to the people who see her? The old man shrugged. Most make it to where they're going, just like you did. But some, he trailed off, glancing out the window toward the dark highway. Some don't ever reach their destination. Trucks found abandoned, drivers gone without a trace. I wanted to dismiss it as local folklore, the kind of story people in small towns tell to keep themselves entertained. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. That eye staring into me, the way she disappeared. "You staying the night?" the old man asked. I nodded. There was no way I was getting back on that road until daylight. "Smart move," he said. "She only comes out at night." I hardly slept at all in my cab that night. Every noise made me jolt awake. The wind whistling around the truck, the occasional passing vehicle, the distant howl of what I told myself was just a coyote. I kept the interior light on, feeling like a kid afraid of the dark. When dawn finally broke, I hit the road again, made it to Vegas without further incident, delivered my load, and tried to put the whole thing behind me. But I can't. It's been a year, and I still think about her every day. I've driven Highway 93 a dozen times since then, always in daylight, always with a knot of dread in my stomach. I haven't seen her again, but sometimes, in my rearview mirror, I catch a glimpse of something white at the edge of my vision. When I turn to look, there's nothing there. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Maybe it was some local woman with mental health issues who wanders the highway. Or maybe, just maybe, the stories are true. All I know is that every time my dispatcher gives me a run that takes me down Highway 93, I feel that same crawling dread. And I find myself checking my mirrors more often, watching the roadside with anxious eyes, hoping I won't see her again. Because I don't know what happens the second time you encounter the woman in white, and I don't want to find out. Story 9. I still can't sleep right. It's been 4 months since I moved out of that house in Beaverton, just outside Portland. But every time I hear the faintest electrical hum or see a light flicker, my heart starts racing. I've never shared this with anyone but my therapist, who suggested writing it down might help, so here goes. Last September, I bought what I thought was my dream home, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a 1990s build with decent-sized rooms and a small backyard. The kind of place where you'd expect to find young families and retirees walking their dogs. Normal, safe. After living in apartments for years, I was excited to finally have my own space with actual neighbors instead of just people on the other side of thin walls. The couple next door, David and Claire, seemed ordinary enough when I first met them. Both in their 40s, David was tall with thinning brown hair, and Claire had this perpetually tired look about her. They brought over a houseplant when I moved in, some kind of fern that died within weeks despite my best efforts. They seemed nice, if a bit reserved. Said they'd lived there for about 3 years, both worked from home, something in IT. Looking back, I should have found it weird how little they actually said about themselves. The first month was uneventful. I was busy unpacking, setting up furniture, getting used to my new commute. It wasn't until October that I started noticing things. It began with the lights. Every night at 10:30, exactly 10:30 according to my microwave clock, the lights in my house would flicker. Just for a second or two. I thought it was just the neighborhood's old electrical grid at first, but then I noticed something through my living room window. The lights in David and Claire's house flickered at precisely the same moment, every single night. I mentioned it casually to my coworker, who suggested checking the circuit breaker, thinking maybe there was a power surge issue. So one night, I went down to my garage to look at the breaker panel. Nothing seemed off, but as I turned to head back upstairs, I glanced out the small window that faced David and Claire's house. David was standing in his window, just standing there, completely still, his face expressionless, eyes fixed directly on my house. I raised my hand to wave, thinking maybe he'd spotted me, but he didn't react. He just kept staring with these unblinking eyes. I'm not usually the paranoid type, but something about his stillness made my skin crawl. I quickly turned off the garage light and hurried back upstairs. That same night I heard it for the first time, a faint buzzing sound coming from the wall I shared with their house, like an electrical transformer or a distant machine. I pressed my ear against the drywall, and the sound got louder. There was a rhythm to it, almost like a pattern, and underneath it I swear I could hear a mechanical clicking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had some home equipment running, a generator or something. But why at night? And why every night? The sounds continued. Sometimes they'd wake me up at 2 or 3 in the morning. Not just the buzzing now, but tapping, like someone systematically knocking on the walls, moving from one spot to another. One night I actually got out of bed and followed the sound as it traveled along the wall, tapping back at one point. The sound immediately stopped. For 10 terrifying minutes, there was complete silence, and then it started again from a different location. About 6 weeks after moving in, I was in my home office when I heard voices, muffled, like someone talking through a radio with poor reception. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation. The weirdest part? It sounded like it was coming from inside my wall, not through the wall from their house, but literally from within the drywall itself. I started paying more attention to David and Claire after that. Their routine was oddly precise. They'd leave their house at exactly 8:15 every morning, returning at 5:45. I never saw them with groceries or shopping bags. Their blinds would close at 7:30 each night, except for the living room window, where I'd sometimes catch David standing, just watching. After nearly 2 months of escalating weirdness, I decided to confront them about the electrical issues. I walked over one Saturday afternoon and knocked. Claire answered, and I almost stepped back in shock. She looked terrible. Her skin was sickly pale, dark circles under her eyes, so pronounced they looked like bruises. Her hair was greasy and uncombed. She seemed surprised to see me, like she'd forgotten she had neighbors. "Is everything okay with your electricity?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I've been having some weird issues with flickering lights, and I wondered if you were experiencing the same thing." "No problems here," she said too quickly. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in days. "Everything's fine." As she spoke, I glanced past her into the hallway. There was a large metal box sitting there, about the size of a mini fridge, with thick black cables snaking out from it and disappearing up the stairs. It looked like something you'd see in a server room, not a residential home. "What's that?" I asked before I could stop myself. Claire partially closed the door, blocking my view. "Just some work equipment," she said. "David's project. Listen, I need to go." She shut the door before I could say anything else. That night, the buzzing was louder than ever. The next day, I called an electrician. He came out and checked my system, finding nothing obviously wrong until he looked at the connection point where the main line entered my house. "Someone's been tampering with this," he said, showing me where wires had been spliced and rerouted. "This isn't standard work. Did you have someone else out here recently?" I hadn't, and that realization sent a chill through me. He also pointed out a section of drywall in my garage that looked like it had been cut out and patched back up. The work was neat, but obvious once he pointed it out. The texture and paint didn't quite match. "Want me to open this up and see what's behind it?" he asked. I should have said yes. God, I wish I had. But something about that patched wall made me deeply uneasy, and I told him I'd handle it myself later. I paid him and spent the rest of the day obsessing over what might be inside my walls. That night, after the 10:30 flicker, I took a hammer and carefully pried off the patched section of drywall in my garage. What I found makes my hands shake even now as I type this. There was a metal conduit, not standard electrical conduit, but something custom-made, running from my house toward the shared property line with David and Claire. Inside the conduit were bundles of wire and what looked like fiber optic cable. Mounted to a wooden stud was a small black box with a tiny red light. When I looked closer, I realized with horror it was a camera, positioned to capture most of my garage through a pinhole opening I would never have noticed. My blood running cold, I followed the conduit as best I could, discovering it disappeared into the floor. Heart pounding, I went back inside and began inspecting my walls more carefully. In my living room, behind a bookshelf I'd positioned. When I moved in, I found another nearly invisible patched section. Pulling away the drywall revealed another camera, this one pointed directly at my couch where I spent most evenings. I was being watched. For how long? Since I moved in, before that. And by whom? David and Claire. But why? I spent the next hour frantically searching my house, finding 3 more cameras, one in my kitchen, one in the hallway, and most disturbingly, one in my bedroom ceiling, pointed at my bed. Each connected to the same system of wires leading toward David and Claire's house. Rage replaced my fear. I grabbed my phone to call the police, then decided against it. I wanted to confront them first, see their faces when I told them I knew. Stupid, I know, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I stormed over to their house at nearly midnight, pounding on their door. No answer. Their car was in the driveway, but all the lights were off. I knocked again, shouting now, not caring if I woke other neighbors. Still nothing. I walked around their house, peering through windows. What I saw, or rather didn't see, was almost more disturbing than the cameras. The house appeared completely empty. No furniture, no pictures on walls, nothing. Just bare rooms with cables running along the floors and what looked like computer equipment stacked in the living room. I called the police then. They arrived 20 minutes later, and after hearing my story, they checked out both houses. They confirmed what I'd found, the cameras, the wiring system. But when they went next door, they found the house completely vacant. Not just empty of people, but cleared out as if no one had lived there for months. The computer equipment I'd seen was gone. The worst part came when they ran a property check. According to city records, no one named David or Claire had ever owned that house. In fact, it had been vacant for over a year after a foreclosure, with property taxes being paid by a management company based in Delaware. The company turned out to be a shell corporation with no traceable owners. The police took the camera equipment as evidence and filed a report, but without knowing who David and Claire really were, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested the pair might have been squatters or running some kind of surveillance operation, possibly targeting multiple homes in the area. They promised to investigate, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. I couldn't stay in that house. 2 weeks later, I broke my lease and moved across town, taking a financial hit I'm still recovering from. I never found out who David and Claire really were or why they'd been watching me. Were they identity thieves, part of some strange voyeuristic ring, government operatives? I'll never know. But sometimes in my new apartment, I swear I can hear that same faint humming in the walls. And last week, I noticed my lights flickered at exactly 10:30. Story 10. And I still can't sleep with the lights off. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and I'm writing this from my new apartment in Seattle. I got the job, by the way. Small victory considering what I went through to get here. I've tried telling a couple of people what happened, but they look at me like I'm making it up or had some kind of mental breakdown from stress. Maybe writing it down will help me process it. I don't know. It was supposed to be a simple 2-day drive from Portland to Seattle for this big interview. I'd packed light, just a suitcase, my laptop, and enough snacks to keep me going. The storm wasn't in the forecast when I left. They said there'd be light rain, maybe some wind, but nothing like what hit. By 6 in the evening, it was like driving through a waterfall. My windshield wipers couldn't keep up and I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. I was somewhere in Washington State, on one of those long stretches of highway with nothing but trees on either side. My gas light had been on for about 15 miles, and my phone was at 12% with no signal. Perfect storm, right? The rain was coming down so hard that the road was starting to flood in places. I was getting desperate, crawling along at maybe 20 miles per hour when I saw it. A faded blue sign for Hollow Creek Motel with a small arrow pointing to a turn-off about 50 yards ahead. I almost missed the turn. It was just a gravel driveway, barely visible in the storm. My car fishtailed as I made the turn, and for a second I thought I was going to slide right into the ditch. The driveway seemed to go on forever, winding through dense trees that looked like they were closing in around me. That's when I got the first feeling that something was off. It wasn't just nerves from the storm, it was this weird pressure, like the air was too thick to breathe properly. When the motel finally came into view, I almost turned around despite the storm and my empty tank. The place looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Two-story, L-shaped building with peeling paint and warped wooden siding. Half the windows were dark, and the ones that had lights behind them gave off this sickly yellow glow. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered with the V in vacancy blinking erratically. I sat in my car for maybe 5 minutes, debating whether to keep driving and risk running out of gas in the storm. Eventually, I decided that even this creepy motel was better than being stranded on the highway. I made a dash for the office through the pouring rain, already soaked by the time I reached the door. The bell above the door gave a weak jingle as I entered. The office was tiny and smelled like mothballs and cigarette smoke. A single desk lamp provided the only light, casting long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. There was no one at the front desk, just an old-fashioned bell with a sign that said, "Ring for service." I rang it once and waited. Nothing. I rang it again, harder this time, and that's when I heard shuffling from a back room. The man who emerged from behind a beaded curtain made my skin crawl instantly. Tall and impossibly thin, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. His eyes were what got me. They were deeply sunken, with dark circles underneath, but they seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. I can't explain it properly. "Need a room," he said. Not a question, a statement. His voice was dry and raspy, like he hadn't spoken in years. "Yeah, just for tonight," I replied, trying to sound casual. The storm caught me off guard. He stared at me for what felt like a full minute without blinking. I was about to say something else when he suddenly reached under the counter and pulled out a key, an actual metal key, not a key card, with a faded plastic tag that had the number 7 written on it in marker. "Last one available," he said, sliding it across the counter. I reached for my wallet. "How much do I—" "You can settle up in the morning," he interrupted. "Room's at the far end, last door." I hesitated. "Don't you need my ID or credit card information?" He just stared at me again, then pointed toward the door. "Room 7, far end." I took the key, thanked him awkwardly, and headed back out into the rain. As I closed the office door, I could have sworn I saw him pick up an old rotary phone from under the counter. The motel was laid out in a long single row, with doors facing the parking lot. My room was all the way at the end, isolated from the few other cars parked there. I pulled my car up in front of it and sat there for a moment, watching the rain pound against my windshield. Through the streams of water, I could see that my room's window had its curtains drawn tight. For some reason, that detail bothered me more than anything else. I grabbed my overnight bag and made another dash through the rain. The key stuck in the lock, requiring some jiggling before the door finally swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. The smell hit me immediately. Mildew and something else I couldn't identify, something stale and vaguely sweet like rotting fruit. I fumbled for a light switch and found one next to the door. A single overhead bulb flickered to life, casting weak yellow light over the room. It was basic. Queen-sized bed with a faded floral bedspread, small table with a TV that had to be at least 20 years old, bathroom door to the right, closet to the left. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners and there were water stains on the ceiling. I checked my phone, down to 8% and still no signal. I plugged it in next to the bed and was surprised that the outlet actually worked. small mercies. The bathroom was as bad as I'd expected. Rust stains in the tub, cracked mirror, flickering fluorescent light. But at least the water ran clear, even if it took forever to warm up. I splashed some water on my face and tried to calm my nerves. It was just an old, run-down motel. Creepy, sure, but not dangerous. I'd sleep, wait out the storm, and be gone at first light. When I came out of the bathroom, the room felt different. Colder, somehow. The air felt heavier, like right before a thunderstorm, when everything gets still and charged. I checked the ancient wall-mounted heater, but it was already cranked to max, rattling and pushing out lukewarm air. I sat on the edge of the bed and nearly jumped out of my skin when the springs creaked loudly. The TV didn't work, just static on every channel. I turned it off, and the silence felt oppressive. Outside, the rain continued to hammer against the window and roof. I was exhausted from driving all day, but as soon as I lay down, I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. The mattress was lumpy, and the pillow had this weird smell, like someone else's hair. I kept my clothes on, just removing my shoes, and pulled the covers up to my chin, despite not being sure I wanted to touch them. That's when I first felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you and you can just tell. It was like that, but 10 times stronger. My eyes kept being drawn to the darkest corner of the room, where the closet door was partially open. I told myself it was just shadows, just my imagination working overtime in this creepy place. I must have lain there for an hour, unable to relax. The rain had settled into a steady downpour, and occasionally lightning would flash, briefly illuminating the room through gaps in the curtains. During one of these flashes, I thought I saw movement in that dark corner. Just a slight shift of the shadows. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table and turned it on. The extra light helped a little, but that corner still seemed unnaturally dark, like the light couldn't quite reach it. I stared at it, trying to convince myself nothing was there. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. This was deeper, slower, coming from the corner. At first I thought maybe it was just the wind or the pipes or something else I could explain away. But it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. No response, but the breathing stopped momentarily, then resumed, slightly faster now. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Is someone there?" As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to make out a figure standing in that corner. Tall and impossibly thin. Just like the man at the front desk, but somehow wrong. Its proportions were off, limbs too long, head slightly too large. It stood completely still, except for the rise and fall of its chest with each breath. I tried to scream, but my throat closed up. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. We stayed like that for what felt like eternity. Me frozen in bed, it watching from the corner. Then it moved. It didn't step forward like a person would. It just shifted position, like a spider adjusting on its web. 1 second it was in the corner, the next it was closer to the foot of the bed. I still couldn't make out its face clearly, just those eyes glinting in the low light. The mattress suddenly dipped at the foot of the bed like something, had sat down. The springs creaked under the weight. I could feel it. This presence at the end of the bed, but when I looked, I couldn't see anything there. The room temperature plummeted. I could see my breath clouding in front of me now. Finally, my body responded to my brain's screaming, and I lunged for the door. As I scrambled across the bed, I felt it, cold, dry fingers brushing against the back of my neck. Just the lightest touch, but it sent electricity down my spine. I fell to the floor, scrambled up and ran for the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Behind me, I heard movement, something sliding across the floor. The door finally opened, and I burst out into the rain. I didn't look back as I ran to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. As I fumbled with the ignition, I finally looked up at the room. The door was still open, light spilling out into the rain. and there, silhouetted in the doorway, was the figure. It didn't move, didn't try to chase me. It just stood there, watching. The car started on the first try, and I reversed so fast I nearly hit the building behind me. As I sped down the gravel driveway, my headlights caught the reflection of the motel sign. The vacancy part had changed. It now read, "No vacancy." I drove all night with the heat on full blast, but I couldn't get warm. I didn't stop until I reached Seattle, running on fumes and adrenaline. When I tried to look up Hollow Creek Motel later, I found nothing. No reviews, no location on maps, not even a mention in local business listings. I've tried to convince myself it was exhaustion or stress, or maybe I was coming down with something that gave me hallucinations. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and sometimes when I'm about to fall asleep, I swear I can hear breathing from the corner of my room. Story 11. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years now. There's not much I haven't seen on America's highways. Roadkill the size of small cars, storms that turn day into night, sunrises that make you believe in something bigger than yourself. But what happened 3 weeks ago on that stretch of Route 66 in New Mexico, I still can't make sense of it. I don't talk about it much. Tried telling my dispatcher and he laughed it off. Mentioned it to my wife and she got that look, the one that says she's worried about my mental health, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and I need to get this off my chest before it eats me alive. It was late, around 1 in the morning. I'd been pushing hard to make up time after a delay in Albuquerque. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark, cutting through the New Mexico desert like a black ribbon. My headlights were the only interruption to the darkness for miles. I'd been driving that route for years, but something felt different that night. The air in my cab felt heavy, like there was a storm coming, but the sky was clear, just a million stars watching me from above. I reached for my CB radio, thinking I'd chat with anyone else crazy enough to be out at that hour, but all I got was static, dead air, not even the usual background chatter you hear from truckers miles away. My eyelids were getting heavy. I'd been on the road for nearly 14 hours, and even though I'd taken my breaks, fatigue was setting in. That's when I saw the sign, just catching the edge of my headlights. Desert Oasis truck stop, 2 miles ahead. I perked up immediately. I didn't remember a truck stop on this stretch, but names and owners change all the time in this business. Maybe it was new, or maybe I just never had reason to stop there before. 2 miles later, I saw it, a small truck stop set back from the highway. There were no other trucks in the lot, which was strange even for that hour, but I figured it might be my lucky night. No waiting for showers, no line for coffee. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires in a way that seemed too loud in the silence. The place looked old, not run down exactly, but like something from another time. The neon sign above the diner flickered weakly, casting a pale blue glow across the empty parking lot. There were no cars, no other trucks, not even any staff vehicles that I could see. I parked and sat there for a minute, engine idling. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was just the emptiness, or the way the darkness seemed to press in around the edges of the lot. I killed the engine and stepped down from my cab. The silence hit me like a physical thing. No highway noise, no distant rumble of other trucks, no insects buzzing or wind blowing through the desert scrub. Just nothing. I walked toward the diner, my boots crunching on the gravel, the sound seeming to echo forever in that unnatural quiet. The diner's windows were dark. I cupped my hands around my eyes and peered inside, but couldn't see anything. I tried the door, locked. There was a sign with hours posted, but it was too faded to read in the dim light. I stepped back, confused. Why would a truck stop be closed at 1 in the morning? That's prime time for places like this. That's when I noticed something weird about my truck. It looked, I don't know how to describe it, like it was fading into the darkness. Not the whole thing, just the edges, like it was being slowly erased from reality. I blinked hard, thinking it was just my tired eyes playing tricks, but when I looked again, it was still happening. I started walking back toward my rig, a cold feeling spreading through my gut. That's when I saw it, a figure at the edge of where my headlights had been shining before I turned off the engine. It wasn't a person, not really. It was more like a shadow, but darker than the night around it. It had no features that I could make out, just this dense blackness in the rough shape of a human. I stopped dead in my tracks. The figure didn't move at first, and I had this crazy thought that maybe it was just a weird shadow cast by something I couldn't see. Then it took a step toward me. Its movement was all wrong, jerky but deliberate, like someone had filmed a person walking and then cut out every other frame. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. The figure took another step, and another. No response, just this terrible, deliberate approach. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. 20 years on the road, and I've never run from anything in my life. But I ran then. I sprinted back to my truck, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. I kept looking up, expecting to see that shadow thing right outside my window, but it was still making its way across the lot, moving at that same unnatural pace. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in reverse, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. I backed out onto the highway without even checking for traffic, then slammed it into drive and floored it. The truck's engine screamed in protest, but I didn't ease off until I'd put at least a mile between me and that place. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that thing following me down the highway. But there was nothing behind me but empty road. Once I'd calmed down a bit, I tried the CB again. This time, through the static, I heard a voice. "Eastbound on 66. This is Night Owl. Anybody out there? Over." I snatched up the handset so fast I nearly dropped it. "Night Owl, this is Big Sky. I'm eastbound on 66, just past." I realized I didn't know exactly where I was anymore. "Just past a truck stop about 15 minutes back. You copy? Over." There was a pause, then, "Big Sky, I copy. What truck stop you talking about? Ain't nothing on this stretch for 50 miles except the old burn site. Over." My blood went cold. "The desert oasis. Just pulled in there about 20 minutes ago. Over." Another pause, longer this time. When Night Owl came back, his voice had changed, gotten quieter. "Big Sky, the desert oasis burned down more than 20 years ago. Never rebuilt it. You sure that's where you were? Over." I couldn't speak for a moment. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "I'm sure, Night Owl. Pulled in, tried the diner, it was locked up. Place was deserted. Over." "Listen, Big Sky." Night Owl's voice crackled through the static. "You ain't the first to see that place when it ain't supposed to be there. That stretch of 66, it's got a reputation. Some say the past bleeds into the present out there sometimes. I don't know about all that, but I know what I know. You saw something that ain't been there for 2 decades. Over." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not a superstitious man. Never believed in ghosts or any of that nonsense. But I know what I saw, what I felt. "You still there, Big Sky?" Over. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, I'm here. You're saying I saw a ghost truck stop?" Over. "I'm not saying anything, partner. Just telling you what I know. Did you see anything else there?" Over. I thought about the shadow figure, its wrong movements, the way it had come toward me with such terrible purpose. "No," I lied. "Just an empty truck stop." Over. "Well, count yourself lucky then. Next real stop is about 30 miles ahead, Sunrise Depot. They got good coffee." Over. "Thanks, Night Owl. I'll keep an eye out for it." Over and out. I drove the rest of the night with all my lights on, the radio blasting to keep me company. When I finally saw the lights of the Sunrise Depot, it was like seeing an old friend. The lot was half full of trucks, the diner windows glowing with warm light, people moving around inside. Normal. Real. I parked and went inside, ordered the biggest coffee they had and sat at the counter. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, must have seen something in my face. "Rough night?" she asked as she refilled my cup without me asking. "You could say that," I replied. I hesitated, then asked, "You ever hear of a place called the Desert Oasis? Used to be down the road about 50 miles back." Her hand paused in the act of putting the coffee pot back. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Another trucker mentioned it." She looked around, then leaned in. "That place has been gone for years. Burned to the ground back in '98. Terrible thing. They say the owner lost his mind, locked the doors with customers still inside, set the whole place on fire. 12 people died." My hands started to shake. I put my coffee down before I spilled it. "They never rebuilt it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She shook her head. "Nobody would. That land's been empty ever since." She gave me a searching look. "Why are you really asking about this?" I forced a smile. "Just making conversation. Thanks for the coffee." I paid and left, feeling her eyes on my back the whole way out. It's been 3 weeks now, and I still can't make sense of what happened. I've been back on the road, taking different routes when I can, but sometimes the job takes me back to that stretch of Route 66. I drive it only in daylight now, and I've seen the burn site the waitress talked about. Just a concrete foundation overgrown with weeds, nothing more. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the road ahead is empty, I'll catch myself checking the mirrors, looking for shadows that move wrong, and I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there on that lonely stretch of highway, a shadow watching and waiting in a place where time has stopped. The worst part? Next month's schedule just came in. I'm assigned to the same route, same delivery window, which means I'll be on that stretch of Route 66 at almost exactly the same time, 1 in the morning, and I keep wondering, if I see that truck stop again, will it let me leave a second time? Story 12. I still can't believe what happened at Black Hollow Lake 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to make sense of it, replaying everything in my head over and over, but I just can't. I need to write this down. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar or can help me understand what we encountered that night. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just me, Emily, my boyfriend Jake, and our friends Claire and Matt. We'd been planning it for weeks, a nice cabin retreat disconnected from work and the stress of city life. Jake found this place online that looked perfect, rustic but comfortable, right on the edge of Black Hollow Lake, surrounded by dense forest. The photos showed this charming wooden cabin with a porch overlooking the water. It seemed like the ideal spot to unwind. We left the city around noon on Friday. The drive started off normal enough. We were all excited, playing road trip games, stopping for snacks. But I remember feeling uneasy as we turned onto the forest road that led to the cabin. The GPS signal kept cutting in and out, and the road got narrower and bumpier the further we drove. The trees seemed to close in around us, blocking out most of the afternoon sun. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Claire asked from the back seat. Jake just nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He'd always been the confident one, but I could tell he was getting nervous too. We finally arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The cabin looked similar to the photos, but somehow different, older, more weathered. The lake beyond it was still and dark, reflecting the dense forest surrounding it like a mirror. I remember thinking it looked beautiful, but somehow wrong, like those AI-generated images where everything seems fine at first glance, but gets unsettling the longer you look. Matt helped Jake unload the car while Claire and I checked out the cabin. Inside it was basic but comfortable. A main room with a fireplace, small kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. The place smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "No cell service," Claire announced, holding her phone up in different spots. "Guess we're really off the grid." I tried mine too. Nothing, not even a single bar. Jake had mentioned the place was isolated, but I hadn't expected to be completely cut off. There was no landline either, just an old radio that didn't seem to work. "That's the point, right?" Jake said when I mentioned it, wrapping his arms around me. "No distractions, just us and nature." We spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. Jake and Matt went down to check out the lake while Claire and I unpacked the food and drinks we'd brought. By evening, we had a fire going in the fireplace, and the cabin felt cozy despite my lingering unease. We made dinner, drank some wine, and played cards around the coffee table. Everything was fine until around 9 o'clock. We were in the middle of a game when Jake noticed the fire getting low. "We need more wood," he said, standing up and stretching. "I'll grab some from the pile I saw around back." "Want me to come with?" I offered. "Nah, I'll just be a minute," he replied, grabbing his jacket and flashlight. The door closed behind him, and we continued our game. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. "Jake's been gone a while," I said, trying to keep my voice casual even as worry began to creep in. Matt frowned. "Yeah, that's weird. I'll go check on him." He took his own flashlight and stepped outside. The night had grown cold and a strange fog had settled around the cabin. I remember watching through the window as Matt's flashlight beam disappeared into the mist. Another 10 minutes passed. Neither of them returned. "Something's wrong," I said to Claire, no longer hiding my concern. She nodded, her face pale in the firelight. "Should we go look for them?" I didn't want to go outside. Every instinct was telling me to stay put, to lock the doors and windows. But these were our boyfriends. What if they were hurt? We grabbed the remaining flashlights and put on our jackets. The night air hit me like a slap when we stepped onto the porch, much colder than it should have been for early fall. The fog had thickened to the point where we could barely see 10 feet ahead. "Jake?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the fog. "Matt?" No response. We moved cautiously around the cabin, our flashlights cutting weak beams through the mist. The woodpile was at the back, partially covered by a small lean-to. There was no sign of Jake or Matt, but I noticed something odd. The wood looked untouched. If Jake had come for firewood, he never took any. "Look at this," Claire whispered, pointing her flashlight at the ground. There were footprints in the damp soil leading away from the woodpile and into the trees. 2 sets. One had to be Jake's and the other presumably Matt's following after him. "We should follow them," I said, though everything inside me was screaming not to. We tracked the footprints into the woods, the fog growing thicker with each step. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling, just the sound of our breathing and footsteps on the soft ground. After walking for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably less, Claire grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Emily," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What is that?" I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. About 20 yards ahead, barely visible through the fog, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, maybe 7 feet or more. It seemed to be wearing tattered black clothing that hung from its limbs like rags. But what terrified me most was that I couldn't make out a face, just a dark void where a head should be. And it wasn't moving like a person. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, as if its feet never touched the ground. "Jake?" I called out weakly, knowing instantly this wasn't him. The figure didn't respond, but it seemed to turn toward us. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt it looking at us, studying us. Claire's flashlight flickered, then went out. Mine followed seconds later. In the sudden darkness, I could still make out the figure's silhouette, somehow darker than the night around it. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Claire's hand. "Run!" We turned and sprinted back toward the cabin, tripping over roots and branches in the dark. I could feel something behind us, not making any sound but getting closer. The air grew colder around us, and I had the horrible sensation of something reaching for my back. We burst out of the trees and saw the cabin ahead, its windows glowing with the dying firelight. We didn't stop running until we were inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. Claire pushed a chair against it while I ran around closing all the curtains and checking the windows. "What the fuck was that?" Claire gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Where are Matt and Jake?" I shook my head, unable to speak. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I tried to light more candles. The fire had nearly died, but neither of us was willing to go back outside for wood. We huddled together on the couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. The minutes stretched into an hour. No sign of the guys. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. Had they gotten lost, hurt, or had they encountered that thing? Then, at around 11:30, we heard it. A knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "Jake?" I called out, hope flaring briefly. No answer, just another 3 knocks, slightly harder this time. Claire and I looked at each other, frozen in fear. Then came a voice from the other side of the door. "Emily, Claire, let me in." It sounded like Matt, but wrong. The words were right, but the voice was flat, emotionless, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. "Matt," Claire called out, taking a step toward the door. I grabbed her arm. "Wait," I whispered. "Something's not right." "Let me in," the voice said again, in exactly the same tone. Not a question or a plea, just a statement. "It's cold out here." Then another voice joined in. Jake's voice, but with the same flat effect. "Emily, open the door. I need to come inside." I felt sick. These weren't our boyfriends. They couldn't be. "Where were you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened to you?" No answer to my questions. Just another repetition. "Open the door. Let us in." The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Then it spread, knocking on the windows all around the cabin. Multiple hands pounding in unison. I pulled Claire away from the door and into one of the bedrooms. We pushed a dresser against that door and huddled on the bed, listening to the knocking grow louder and more frenzied. "They can't get in if we don't invite them," Claire whispered, though I had no idea how she knew this or if it was true. Then the knocking suddenly stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. We waited, barely breathing, straining to hear any sound. A soft tapping came at the bedroom window. I looked up to see a hand pressed against the glass. It looked human, but something was wrong with the proportions. The fingers too long, too thin. A face appeared behind the hand. It looked like Jake, his features, his hair, but his expression was blank, and his eyes were completely black, like empty sockets. "Emily," the thing wearing Jake's face whispered, its mouth barely moving. "Let us in." Then another whisper joined it, from all around us. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." The voices multiplied until it sounded like dozens of them were whispering in unison, some using Jake's and Matt's voices, others in tones I'd never heard before, high and low, old and young, all speaking together. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see our breath fogging in the air. The window began to frost over, ice crystals spreading across the glass in intricate patterns. Claire was praying beside me, repeating the same words over and over. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The thing that looked like Jake kept staring through the frosting glass, its black eyes fixed on me. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The whispering stopped. The temperature slowly began to rise. We stayed in that bedroom until morning, neither of us sleeping, holding each other and listening for any sound. When daylight finally came, we cautiously ventured out. The cabin was undisturbed, but felt different somehow, empty in a way that went beyond the missing presence of Jake and Matt. We packed our things in silence and left without exploring the woods or looking for the guys. I know how that sounds, like we abandoned them. But whatever was out there wasn't Jake and Matt anymore. I knew that with absolute certainty. We drove straight to the nearest police station about 40 minutes away. They took our report and sent search parties to the cabin and surrounding woods. They found nothing, no sign of Jake or Matt, no footprints in the woods, nothing unusual at all. The officers looked at us like we were crazy or drunk or both. It's been 3 weeks now. Jake and Matt are still missing. Claire won't talk to me anymore. I think looking at me just reminds her of that night. The police investigation is ongoing, but they're focusing on the lake now, suggesting the guys might have drowned. They don't believe our story about what we saw. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think I hear whispering outside my apartment window. "Let me in," it says in Jake's voice. "Emily, let me in." I keep all my windows locked now. I don't answer unexpected knocks at my door, and I lie awake wondering what's out there in the darkness of Black Hollow Lake, wearing my boyfriend's face, waiting for me to let it in. Story 13. I still don't know what happened to us that night. It's been 3 months, and I'm finally able to write this down without having a panic attack. My therapist says it might help to share my experience, but I honestly don't think anyone will believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. My sister Sophie and I were driving back from our cousin's wedding in Colorado. We decided to take the scenic route through the mountains instead of the highway, a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. It was supposed to be a 6-hour drive, and we'd planned to reach our hotel before sunset. Sophie had just graduated college, and this trip was meant to be a celebration before she started her new job. Everything was fine until about 4 in the afternoon when our GPS started glitching. The screen kept freezing, then rerouting us down these smaller and smaller roads. I tried using my phone's GPS instead, but there was no signal, not even one bar. Sophie joked that we were in horror movie territory now, and I laughed it off. We weren't worried yet. The sun was still up, we had half a tank of gas, and surely we'd find our way back to the main road eventually. An hour later, I wasn't laughing anymore. The road had narrowed to barely 2 lanes, winding through dense forest that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. Tall pines crowded against the road, creating this tunnel effect that made me feel claustrophobic. The temperature dropped suddenly, I remember, having to turn the heater on even though it was August. "Jason, I don't like this," Sophie said, staring out the window. "We haven't seen another car for like an hour." I tried to sound confident. "We'll find a town or at least a gas station soon. We can ask for directions." That's when we saw the sign, weathered wood with faded paint. Hollow Creek, 2 miles. It was the first sign we'd seen in over an hour, so I felt relieved. A town meant people, directions, maybe even a place to stay if it was getting too late to continue. "Thank God," Sophie said, and I nodded, pushing away the strange feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. The road curved sharply around a hill, and suddenly Hollow Creek appeared below us. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. The town was small, maybe 20 buildings arranged along a main street with a few side roads branching off. There were streetlights, some flickering, some steady, but they cast this sickly yellow glow that didn't seem to actually illuminate anything. As we drove closer, I noticed there weren't any cars moving on the streets. A few vehicles were parked, but they looked old, not vintage or classic, just neglected. The buildings themselves had this worn-down appearance, peeling paint, dusty windows, faded signs. "Is it some kind of historical town?" Sophie asked, leaning forward in her seat. "Like one of those tourist places where they dress up in old-timey clothes?" "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. Tourist towns don't feel abandoned at 5:30 in the evening. I drove slowly down the main street, looking for any sign of life. The only sound was our tires on the pavement and the engine of my Honda. No people walking around, no music from bars or restaurants, no dogs barking, nothing, just absolute silence. "There's a gas station." Sophie pointed to a small building at the end of the street. It had a faded blue sign reading Miller's Gas and Supplies. One of the lights was on inside, and the price board was lit up, though the prices seemed impossibly low. I pulled in, more out of desperation than hope. The gas pumps looked ancient but operational. A bell dinged somewhere as we drove over the sensor, but nobody came out. "Wait here," I told Sophie. "I'll go see if anyone's inside." She grabbed my arm. "No way, I'm coming with you." We got out together, and the cold hit me immediately. It must have dropped 20 degrees since we entered the town limits. The air felt dense and smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, just off, like the smell of a basement that's been closed up for years. The door to the station chimed as we entered. The inside was lit by a single fluorescent light that buzzed and flickered. Shelves with basic supplies, canned food, batteries, maps, lined the walls, all covered in a thin layer of dust. Behind the counter was an old-fashioned cash register, but no attendant. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded muffled, as if the air was absorbing it. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Sophie wandered to a rack of maps while I checked behind the counter. There was a small office door that was slightly ajar. "Hello, we need some directions," I called again, pushing the door open further. The office was empty, but something on the desk caught my eye. A handwritten note, the ink still looking fresh. "Don't stay after dark. If you hear them, don't answer. Leave before the moon is full." A chill ran down my spine. I took a picture of the note with my phone, though I don't know why. Maybe as evidence that I wasn't making this up? The timestamp would later show 6:23 p.m. "Jason, look at this," Sophie called from the front. She was holding an old newspaper. The headline read, "Hollow Creek celebrates 150 years," but the date was what caught my attention. October 10th, 1997. More than 25 years ago. "This place is creeping me out," Sophie whispered. "Let's just go." I nodded, stuffing the newspaper into my pocket. As we turned to leave, the fluorescent light above us flickered rapidly and then went out completely. The only illumination now came from the fading daylight through the dusty windows. That's when we heard it. Whispers. So faint at first that I thought it was just the wind. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. "Did you hear that?" Sophie grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "It's nothing," I said, but even I didn't believe it. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not English, not any language I recognized, just this constant, urgent murmuring that made my skin crawl. We hurried out of the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a jarring contrast to the dread building in my chest. Outside, a thick fog had rolled in, obscuring most of the town. The streetlights were now surrounded by hazy halos, and the buildings beyond the gas station had become shadowy outlines. The whispers followed us outside, growing louder, more insistent. I could almost make out words now, like they were calling to us. Sophie started crying, quiet, frightened sobs that broke my heart. "We need to go," I said, pulling her toward the car. "Now." As we reached for the car doors, I noticed something moving in the fog. Tall, unnaturally thin figures, gliding rather than walking. They emerged from between buildings, from alleys, from the forest edge beyond the town, at least a dozen of them. "Jason," Sophie's voice was barely audible. "What are those?" I couldn't answer. The figures were human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their proportions distorted. And they moved with this horrible grace, like they weren't touching the ground at all. The fog swirled around them, almost like it was part of them. We jumped into the car, and I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before finally getting them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as we backed away from the approaching figures. One of them reached the edge of the gas station lot. In the headlights, I caught a glimpse of its face, or where a face should have been. There were hollows for eyes, a slash for a mouth, but no features, just darkness. Its fingers were elongated, almost skeletal, reaching toward us. I threw the car into drive and floored it, racing down the main street toward the way we had come in. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The whispers had become a constant noise, not just outside but somehow inside my head, urging me to stop, to turn around, to come back. "Don't listen," I shouted to Sophie, though I'm not sure if she could hear me over the whispers. "Cover your ears." She pressed her hands against her ears, rocking back and forth in the passenger seat, her eyes squeezed shut. I wanted to do the same, but I had to focus on driving, on getting us out of there. The road twisted and turned, nothing like I remembered coming in. Every time I thought we were reaching the edge of town, another building would loom out of the fog. It was like the town was expanding, rearranging itself to keep us trapped. The gas gauge started dropping rapidly, impossible given the short distance we'd traveled. The needle moved visibly toward empty as I watched, like something was draining our tank. "They're following us!" Sophie screamed, looking out the back window. I glanced in the rearview mirror and nearly drove off the road. The figures were behind us, moving impossibly fast, keeping pace with the car, even though we were doing over 50 miles per hour. The road ahead suddenly vanished into mist. I hit the brakes, the car skidding. When the mist cleared momentarily, I saw why. The road simply ended, dropping off into nothingness. I wrenched the wheel, turning us around in a screeching 180. The only way out was back through town, back through them. That's when I saw it standing in the middle of the road. One of the figures, taller than the others, its form, rippling like smoke. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding toward it. The moment we stopped, they surrounded us. Dozens of them now, pressing against the windows, their featureless faces inches from the glass. The whispers became a roar, filling the car, filling our minds. I remember Sophie screaming. I remember trying to restart the car, but nothing happened when I turned the key. The lights inside the car flickered and died. The darkness was absolute. The last thing I heard before everything went silent was a voice, not a whisper this time, but clear and cold. You shouldn't have stayed. Then, nothing. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital 90 miles away from where we should have been. Sophie was in the bed next to mine, still unconscious. According to the police, a trucker found our car parked in the middle of Route 25, hazards blinking, both of us unconscious inside. Our gas tank was empty, the battery dead. They told us there is no town called Hollow Creek. Never has been, not in that county, not in the entire state. The road we described doesn't exist on any map. The newspaper I thought I'd taken was gone. The photo of the note on my phone was corrupted, just a black image. Sophie woke up a day after me. She remembers everything I do, every horrible detail. The doctors called it shared delusion from carbon monoxide poisoning, but they couldn't explain the small handprint-shaped bruises on our arms, or the fact that both our phones had the same timestamp for when they stopped working, exactly midnight. I still hear the whispers sometimes, right as I'm falling asleep. Sophie says she does too. We've tried to find information about Hollow Creek online, in libraries, anywhere, but there's nothing. I don't know what happened to us that night. I don't know what those things were, but I know it was real, and I know we escaped when others didn't. If you're ever driving through the mountains and your GPS fails, if you find yourself on an unfamiliar road, as daylight fades and you see a sign for Hollow Creek, keep driving. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't stay after dark. Story 14. I've been driving big rigs for over 30 years now. 30 damn years hauling everything from livestock to machinery across this country. I've seen pretty much everything the road can throw at you. Blizzards, tornadoes, drunk drivers, you name it. But what happened to me last winter on Devil's Pass, I still can't explain it. I've never told anyone except my wife, but I need to get this off my chest. It was mid-January, and I was looking forward to a few days off at home when my dispatcher called with an emergency job. Some steel shipment needed to get from Denver to Salt Lake City overnight, and they were offering serious money, like triple the normal rate. Most drivers had already turned it down because of the weather forecast, but I figured with my experience, I could handle it. Besides, the extra cash would help with my grandson's college fund. I should have listened to my gut. The weather service was predicting a major snowstorm to hit the Rockies that night, right across my route through Devil's Pass. It's a nasty stretch of mountain road that's dangerous even in good conditions. All switchbacks and steep drops with guardrails that wouldn't stop a shopping cart, let alone an 18-wheeler. But I'd driven it dozens of times before, and I thought if I could beat the worst of the storm, I'd be fine. I loaded up around 8 in the evening, did my checks, and was on the road by 10. The first couple hours were easy enough. Clear skies, hardly any traffic. I had the radio on to some old country station, sipping coffee from my thermos. I remember thinking I might actually make good time and miss the storm entirely. Man, was I wrong. Just as I started the climb into the mountains, the snow began. It was light at first, just a few flakes dancing in my headlights. No big deal. But within 20 minutes it was coming down hard. The kind of snow that hypnotizes you if you stare at it too long. My wipers were working overtime, and I had to slow way down to maybe 30 miles per hour. By the time I reached the entrance to Devil's Pass, it was close to 1 in the morning, and the storm had turned into a full-on blizzard. Visibility was maybe 20 feet in front of me. The road had disappeared under several inches of snow, and I was basically following the reflectors on the guardrail to stay on the pavement. Every trucker knows that feeling, when your knuckles go white on the wheel and your back tenses up so much it aches. One wrong move, and I'd be sliding right off the mountain. I considered pulling over and waiting it out, but there aren't many safe spots to stop on that stretch, and I was worried about getting stuck if the snow kept piling up. So I pressed on, crawling along at maybe 15 miles per hour, my CB radio just static, no other drivers crazy enough to be out there. That's when I noticed the headlights in my mirror. At first I was relieved. Another vehicle meant I wasn't completely alone out there, but something felt off right away. These lights were coming up fast. Way too fast for these conditions. No sane driver would be moving that quickly on an icy mountain pass in a blizzard. I tapped my brakes, thinking maybe they'd realize how dangerous it was and slow down. The lights just kept coming. Within seconds, they were right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see the headlights anymore in my mirrors, just the glow lighting up my trailer. "Back off, you idiot," I muttered, getting nervous. If I had to brake suddenly, they'd plow right into me. Instead of backing off, this vehicle, which I could now see was another semi, started to pass me. On Devil's Pass, in a blizzard, on a curve. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was barely enough room for 2 trucks side by side in good conditions, alone with several inches of snow obscuring the lane markings. I slowed down even more, hugging the right side as much as I dared with the drop-off just feet away. The other truck pulled alongside me, and that's when the real fear hit me. This wasn't a normal rig. Even through the curtain of snow, I could see it was ancient, maybe from the 70s or 80s. The paint was peeling off in sheets, exposing rusted metal underneath. The chrome was tarnished black. The cab looked like it had been through a demolition derby, dented and crumpled in places. One of the headlights was busted, giving it a lopsided glow. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the truck's condition. It was the empty driver's seat. I'm not talking about not being able to see the driver because of the angle or the snow. I mean, there was no one behind the wheel. The cab was illuminated enough from my lights that I could see straight through the windshield, and there was nothing but an empty, torn-up seat. Yet the truck was keeping perfect pace with me around the curve, not slipping or sliding at all despite the ice, just gliding alongside like it was on rails instead of tires. I've never been so terrified in my life. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly lost control. I couldn't look away from that empty seat. I kept thinking I'd see something, anything, materialize there, but there was nothing. Just an empty cab somehow navigating one of the most dangerous roads in America during a blizzard. For what felt like forever but was probably only 30 seconds, we drove side by side, me and this impossible driverless truck. I couldn't speed up, couldn't slow down anymore without risking a skid. I was trapped. Then, without warning, the phantom truck swerved toward the left, the cliffside. I braced for impact, but it never came. Instead, the truck just disappeared over the edge. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. No crash, no explosion, no sound at all except the howling wind and my engine. I was so rattled I nearly went off the road myself. I managed to pull into a turnout about a mile ahead and just sat there shaking. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it, the stress, the fatigue, the hypnotic snow, but I knew what I'd seen. After about 15 minutes, I got my nerves together enough to continue. I white-knuckled it through the rest of the pass, expecting that rusted rig to appear behind me again at any moment. It never did. By dawn, I'd made it through the mountains. The storm had let up and I pulled into a truck stop just outside Salt Lake to get some coffee and try to make sense of what happened. The place was full of drivers waiting out the tail end of the storm. I grabbed a seat at the counter, ordered the biggest coffee they had, and just sat there staring into it, still shaking a little. 2 older drivers took the stools next to me. They were talking about the pass, how it was closed now due to the storm, and I found myself listening in. "Wouldn't catch me on Devil's Pass in a snowstorm anyway," one of them said. Not after what happened to old Mike Wheeler. The name didn't mean anything to me, but I felt the hairs stand up on my arms. That was back in '83, wasn't it? The other one asked. '82, December. Blizzard, just like last night. Wheeler was hauling machine parts to Denver, decided to push through rather than wait it out. They found his rig the next day, about 500 feet down the ravine on the north face of the pass. I turned to them, unable to help myself. "What happened to the driver?" I asked, already knowing the answer somehow. They looked surprised that I'd joined their conversation, but the first driver shrugged. "That's the thing. They never found him. Truck was totaled, crushed like a beer can and burned out, but no body. Some folks said he must have been thrown clear and wandered off in the storm, died of exposure somewhere they never looked. Others think he survived somehow, walked away from the whole thing." His friend snorted. "You're leaving out the part where some drivers claim they've seen Wheeler's truck on the pass during bad storms. Rusted out old Peterbilt, they say. Passes them like they're standing still, then vanishes." "That's just truck stop bullshit," the first guy said. "Ghost stories to scare the rookies." They changed the subject after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen wasn't just my imagination. That empty truck, Wheeler's truck, had been right there beside me, and maybe it had been trying to warn me, show me what happens when you push your luck on Devil's Pass in a blizzard. I delivered my load on time, but I called my dispatcher after and told him I needed a few days off. Told him I had a close call in the storm and needed to recover. He didn't argue. That was 6 months ago. I'm still driving, still making my runs, but I've turned down every job that would take me over Devil's Pass. My dispatcher thinks I'm being ridiculous, passing up good money because of some superstitious nonsense. Let him think that. I know what I saw that night. I replay it in my mind almost every day. That empty driver's seat, the rusted metal, the way it disappeared over the cliff without a sound. Was it Wheeler, somehow still trying to make his final delivery? Was it a warning meant just for me? I don't know. All I know is that there are things out on those lonely roads that can't be explained. And if you're ever driving through the Rockies during a snowstorm and see headlights coming up fast behind you, pray it's just some reckless idiot and not Mike Wheeler's ghost truck, still running its route 40 years after its final crash, because I don't think he's looking for company. But I do think he's trying to warn us, and next time I'll listen. Story 15. I still get chills thinking about what happened that summer in 2014. It's been almost 9 years, but I can't shake the memory of those dead eyes staring at me through the window of our van. My girlfriend Emma and I were making the drive from Toronto down to North Carolina to visit my grandmother, who'd taken a bad turn health-wise. Emma's Canadian, and I'd been living up there with her for about 2 years at that point, but I grew up in Charlotte. When my mom called to tell me Grandma Reynolds probably didn't have much time left, we packed up the van and hit the road. We'd been driving for about 15 hours straight, taking turns behind the wheel. By the time we crossed into West Virginia, it was getting dark, and we were deep in the Appalachians. I'm talking proper backwoods, those winding mountain roads where the trees crowd in from both sides and you can drive for an hour without seeing another car. The gas light had been on for about 20 miles, and I was starting to get nervous. Emma was asleep in the passenger seat, and I didn't want to wake her, but I was genuinely worried we might end up stranded. Then, like some kind of miracle, I spotted a gas station up ahead, one of those old-school places with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store. I pulled in, relieved, and shut off the engine. Emma stirred but didn't wake up. The place looked deserted except for a flickering light inside the store. The sign said "open" though, so I grabbed my wallet and stepped out to fill up. It was one of those humid summer nights where the air feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. The mountains loomed around us, blocking out most of the sky. No streetlights out there, just the dim glow from the gas station and a million stars overhead. I was standing there pumping gas when I felt someone watching me. You know that feeling, right? The hairs on your neck stand up before you even consciously register what's happening. I turned around, and there she was, this woman, just standing there maybe 15 feet away. At first glance, she looked normal. Enough probably in her 40s, wearing a faded dress that hung loose on her thin frame. But something was off. Her posture was too rigid, like she wasn't comfortable in her own body. And her eyes, they were wide open, unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. I nodded, trying to be polite. "Evening," I said. She didn't respond, just kept staring, her head tilted slightly to one side. I focused on the gas pump, trying to ignore her, but I could feel those eyes boring into me. When I looked up again, she'd moved closer, now maybe 10 feet away, without making a sound. Same rigid posture, same unblinking stare. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. She opened her mouth, and at first, no sound came out. Then she spoke in this raspy whisper, "You're not from here." It wasn't a question, just a statement, delivered in a flat tone that made my skin crawl. "No, ma'am," I replied, "just passing through." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Where you headed?" I hesitated. Something told me not to share our destination. "South," I said vaguely. A smile spread across her face then, not a friendly one. It was like someone had described a smile to her and she was trying to imitate it. Her lips pulled back, but her eyes remained cold and fixed. "The mountains have eyes," she whispered. "They see everything that passes through." By this point, I was thoroughly creeped out. The gas pump clicked off, and I quickly replaced the nozzle, screwed my gas cap back on, and stepped away from her toward the store. "Have a good night," I said, not meaning it. As I walked to the store, I glanced back. She hadn't moved, but she'd turned to keep watching me, her head rotating while her body stayed fixed in place. Inside, there was just one employee, an older guy with a grizzled beard sitting behind the counter, reading a hunting magazine. He looked up when I entered. "Pump 3, I said, pulling out my wallet. He nodded and rang me up. I hesitated, then asked, "That woman outside, is she okay?" His reaction was immediate and alarming. He froze, then slowly put down his magazine. "What woman?" Outside, by the pumps, thin, kinda intense stare. The color drained from his face. He reached under the counter and pulled out a rifle, laying it across the register within easy reach. Then he moved to the window, carefully peering out. "Where'd you see her?" he asked, scanning the darkness. "Right by my van, pump 3. He looked for a long moment, then turned back to me, his expression grim. "She's gone now." I felt a chill despite the warm night. "Who is she?" He sighed heavily, keeping one hand near the rifle. "Listen, son. There's folks that live deep in these mountains. Been there for generations. They keep to themselves mostly, but sometimes they come down looking for, I don't know what." "Like a cult or something?" I asked. "Something like that. They've got their own ways, their own rules." He lowered his voice. "Couple years back, we had some hikers go missing up on the trails. Never found them. Police couldn't prove nothing, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You think they had something to do with it?" "I don't know what to think, but I know enough to keep my distance." He looked me straight in the eyes. "You heading out tonight?" I nodded. "Good. Don't stop till you're well clear of these mountains. And if you see her or any of them again, don't engage. Just keep moving." I thanked him, paid for the gas, and headed back to the van, scanning the darkness nervously. No sign of the woman. Emma was awake now, scrolling through her phone. "Everything okay?" she asked as I got in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I started the engine before explaining what had happened. As I spoke, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that woman's face appear in the darkness behind us. Emma, practical as always, suggested I was overreacting. "Probably just some local eccentric," she said. "The guy was messing with you." I wanted to believe her, but the attendant's fear had seemed genuine, and something about that woman's eyes. We drove for another couple of hours, the road winding deeper into the mountains. It was after midnight when exhaustion started to catch up with me. My eyes kept trying to close, and the yellow line in the middle of the road seemed to be hypnotizing me. "We need to stop," Emma said after I swerved for the third time. "You're going to kill us both." I knew she was right, but the gas station attendant's warning echoed in my head. Still, it had been hours since we'd left the station, and we'd covered a lot of ground. Surely we were safe. We pulled off onto a small dirt road that led to a clearing, probably used by hikers as a trailhead. I backed the van in so we could see the main road just in case. We had one of those conversion vans with a bed in the back and curtains for privacy. Nothing fancy, but good enough for road trips. Despite my unease, exhaustion won out. We locked the doors, closed the curtains, and collapsed into bed. I remember checking the time on my phone. It was almost 1 in the morning. The next thing I knew, Emma was shaking me awake, her hand clamped over my mouth. My first instinct was to pull away, but then I saw the terror in her eyes. "Someone's outside," she whispered, so quietly I almost couldn't hear her. I froze, straining my ears. At first all I could hear was the natural sounds of the forest, crickets, the rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel circling our van. Not just one person, several. I heard voices too, hushed, murmuring in what sounded like normal conversation, but just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. They were walking around our van, almost casually, like they were inspecting it. Emma's grip on my arm tightened painfully. We both stared at the curtained windows, knowing how thin the barrier between us and whoever was outside really was. Then came the sound we'd been dreading, the metallic rattle of someone trying the door handle. I felt my heart stop. We'd locked the doors, I was sure of it. But in that moment, I had a horrible vision of the locks failing, of those people flooding into our van, of those unblinking eyes. I reached under the bed and pulled out my handgun. I'm not some gun nut, but I'd grown up around them in North Carolina, and I kept one for protection. Never thought I'd need to use it. The door handle rattled again, more insistently this time. Then a soft tap on the window, like someone gently knocking with a fingernail. "We know you're in there," came a voice, the woman's voice from the gas station. "We just want to talk." Emma shook her head frantically, tears streaming silently down her face. I put my finger to my lips, though I don't know why. They clearly knew we were inside. "Open the door," the woman said again, her voice eerily calm. "The mountains want to meet you." That did it. I couldn't take it anymore. I moved to the side window, took a deep breath, and in one quick motion pulled back the curtain and aimed the gun outside. There they were, 5 or 6 figures standing around our van, men and women, all with that same rigid posture, those same wide, unblinking eyes. And right in front of me, her face just inches from the glass, was the woman from the gas station, her hand still on our door handle. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then I pressed the gun directly against the glass, pointed at her face. "Back off!" I shouted, loud enough that they could hear me through the window. "I will shoot." Something flickered across her face then. Not fear exactly, but recognition. She understood the threat. Slowly, deliberately, she removed her hand from the door handle and took a step back. The others followed her lead, retreating slightly but not leaving. They formed a loose semicircle around the van, watching us, with those dead eyes. "Emma," I said, not taking my eyes or my gun off them, "get in the driver's seat now." She didn't hesitate. I felt her climb over me, moving to the front of the van. I heard the engine start, felt the vehicle come to life beneath me. "Go," I said. "Go." Emma floored it. The van lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. Through the window, I saw the group scatter, moving with surprising quickness to avoid being hit. We fishtailed onto the main road, and Emma drove like hell, the speedometer hitting 80 on those winding mountain roads. After about 20 minutes, when it was clear no one was following us, I climbed into the passenger seat. Emma's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her face set in grim determination. We switched positions at the next wide spot in the road, and I drove until dawn, neither of us speaking much. By morning, we were out of the mountains and into the Piedmont region of North Carolina. We stopped at a busy diner for breakfast, both of us jumping at every sound, checking over our shoulders constantly. "How did they find us?" Emma finally asked, her coffee untouched in front of her. "We drove for hours after the gas station. How did they know where we stopped?" I shook my head. I didn't have an answer then, and I don't have one now. We made it to my grandmother's house that afternoon. We never told anyone about what happened. Who would believe us? But we made sure to take a different route home, avoiding West Virginia entirely. That was 9 years ago. My grandmother passed away a month after our visit. Emma and I eventually broke up for reasons unrelated to that night. But to this day, neither of us has ever gone back to that part of the Appalachians. And sometimes when I'm driving alone at night and pass a remote gas station, I find myself checking the mirrors, half expecting to see those unblinking eyes watching me from the darkness. Story 16. I still can't explain what happened to me last month. Part of me wants to believe it was just extreme exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, but I know what I experienced was real. I've barely slept since that night, and I've been putting off writing this down because I'm afraid revisiting it might somehow bring it all back. But I need to tell someone, even if no one believes me. I'd been driving for almost 14 hours straight when it happened. I was on my way to a job interview in Portland, a position that could have changed everything for me. The drive from Phoenix was supposed to take 2 days, but I got a late start because my car wouldn't start that morning. By the time I hit Northern California, it was already past midnight. I was on some forgotten stretch of Highway 97, miles from anything resembling civilization, and the exhaustion was hitting me hard. My eyelids kept getting heavier, and I caught myself nodding off twice. After the second time, when I jerked awake to find myself drifting into the opposite lane, thankfully empty, I knew I needed to stop. The problem was, I hadn't seen any signs for motels or rest stops for at least an hour. My GPS was useless too. I'd lost signal about 40 minutes earlier. That's when I saw it. Through the darkness and the light rain that had just started, a flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. The Last Vacancy Motel. The sign buzzed and sputtered, the V in vacancy blinking on and off erratically. Below it, another sign read, "Rooms available." I'm not usually the type to stay in places like this. The whole building looked like it was one strong wind away from collapsing. The paint was peeling and half the exterior lights were burned out. But at that point, I was too exhausted to care. I just needed a few hours of sleep before continuing my journey in the morning. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, noticing there were only 2 other cars there, an ancient station wagon with a tarp covering one broken window and a rusted pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Not exactly reassuring, but I was desperate. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled like mothballs and cigarette smoke. A small desk lamp provided the only light, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. There was no one at the front desk when I walked in, just a little bell with a handwritten sign that said, "Ring for service." When I rang it, the sound seemed to echo unnaturally loud in the empty space. After about 30 seconds, I heard shuffling footsteps and an elderly woman emerged from a door behind the desk. Something about her immediately set me on edge. She was incredibly thin, with deeply sunken eyes and papery skin stretched tight across her cheekbones. Her movements were jerky, almost puppet-like, and she never blinked when she looked at me. "Need a room?" she asked, her voice raspy and dry. I nodded, trying not to show my unease. "Just for tonight. I'll be leaving early in the morning." She didn't respond to that, just pulled out an actual physical ledger, not a computer system, and pushed it toward me, along with a pen that had teeth marks all over it. $45. Cash only, she said. Luckily, I had enough cash on me. As I filled out the ledger, I noticed all the other entries seemed to be written in the same handwriting, despite having different names. I told myself I was being paranoid. When I handed over the money, her fingers brushed against mine, and I had to suppress a shudder. They were ice cold and felt rough, like sandpaper. "Room 13, she said, sliding a heavy brass key across the counter. Not a key card, an actual metal key attached to a plastic tag with the number scratched into it. "End of the hall, left side, no visitors, no noise after 10. Checkouts at 11. I thanked her and grabbed my overnight bag from the car. The rain had picked up and the wind had a strange, mournful sound as it whipped around the building. The walkway to the rooms was covered but poorly lit, with only every third overhead light working. I had to use my phone flashlight to find room 13. As I walked, I realized how eerily quiet the place was. Despite the 2 cars in the lot, there were no sounds coming from any of the other rooms. No TVs, no voices, no signs of life whatsoever. Just the creaking of the building and the patter of rain. Room 13 was at the very end of the hallway, just as she'd said. The door was noticeably more worn than the others, its dark green paint chipped away to reveal several older layers beneath. The brass number 13 hung crooked, with one screw missing. It took some jiggling to get the key to work in the lock. When I finally pushed the door open, I was hit by the musty smell of a room that hadn't been aired out in a long time. It was basic, just a queen bed with a faded floral comforter, a small desk with a lamp, and a TV that looked like it was from the 90s. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of discolored tile. I'm not a germaphobe, but something made me check the sheets before sitting down. They seemed clean enough, though yellowed with age. I was too tired to be picky. I put my bag down, locked the door, both the regular lock and the chain, and collapsed onto the bed without even changing my clothes. Despite my exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. The mattress was lumpy, and every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake with this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just anxiety about my interview, but it felt more intense than that, more immediate. After tossing and turning for what felt like hours, I noticed something strange about the ceiling above the bed. There was a dark patch that I hadn't seen before. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I stared at it, I realized it was spreading. It looked like a water stain growing larger by the minute, the ceiling material seeming to darken and sag. I sat up, heart pounding. That's when I heard it, a slow, rhythmic dripping coming from the bathroom. Drip, drip, drip. I was certain I hadn't left any water running. The sound hadn't been there when I first entered the room. My mind raced with possibilities, a burst pipe, a leak from the room above, but somehow I knew it was something worse. I didn't want to check. Every instinct was screaming at me to grab my things and run, but I couldn't just leave without knowing, so I forced myself to stand up and approach the bathroom door. The dripping got louder as I pushed the door wider. The bathroom light flickered on automatically, illuminating the small space in harsh fluorescent bursts. The sink faucet was running, just a thin, steady stream of rusty-looking water. I know I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't even used the bathroom yet. With shaking hands, I reached out to turn it off. As I did, I glanced up at the mirror and froze. There was someone standing behind me. It was just a glimpse, a dark figure, taller than me, with no distinguishable features except for eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When I spun around, there was no one there. I backed out of the bathroom, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. That's when I noticed the door to my room. The door I had definitely locked and chained was now standing wide open, revealing the dimly lit hallway outside. I don't know what possessed me to run into that hallway instead of just getting in my car and driving away. Maybe it was the certainty that whatever had been in my bathroom was now between me and the exit. All I knew was that I needed to find another way out, but the hallway had changed. When I'd arrived, it had been a straight shot from the lobby to my room, maybe 12 doors total. Now it stretched into darkness in both directions, seeming to go on forever. The worn carpet pattern repeated endlessly and identical. Doors lined both walls as far as I could see. I chose the direction I thought led back to the lobby and started running. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, some blinking out completely as I passed under them, plunging sections of the hallway into momentary darkness. The numbers on the doors made no sense. 13, 47, 22, 13 again, 9, 13, a third time. That's when the whispering started. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just the sound of my own panicked breathing. But it grew louder, becoming a chorus of overlapping voices that seemed to come from behind every door. I couldn't make out words, just the urgent, insistent hiss of dozens of whispers. I ran faster, but the hallway kept stretching before me. My lungs burned, and sweat soaked my clothes despite the unnatural chill in the air. Then I started seeing things in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes sliding across the walls, always just at the edge of my sight. When I'd turn to look directly at them, they'd vanish, only to reappear elsewhere. The whispers changed, becoming more synchronized, almost like a chant, and the shadows on the walls began to take more solid form, human-shaped silhouettes with hollow, empty eyes that followed my movements. I screamed for help, pounding on doors as I passed, but my knocks just echoed hollowly. No one answered. Some doors opened at my touch, revealing rooms identical to mine, all empty, all with that same dark stain spreading across the ceiling. The hallway began to narrow, the walls inching closer with each step I took. The ceiling lowered too, until I was hunched over, barely able to move forward. The whispers were deafening now, and the shadow figures pressed in from all sides, their cold presence raising goosebumps on my skin. I couldn't go back. Something terrible was behind me, I could feel it. But going forward seemed impossible too, as the space continued to constrict around me. In desperation, I threw myself against one of the doors, hoping it might give way to an exit. Instead, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck, like fingertips made of ice. The whispers surged into a roar, and everything went black. I woke up in my car, still parked in front of the motel. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and I was drenched in sweat, my clothes sticking to my skin. My overnight bag was on the passenger seat, exactly where I'd left it before checking in. The key to room 13 was clutched in my hand, the jagged metal digging into my palm. For a moment I thought maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing, that I'd been so tired I'd hallucinated everything after pulling into the parking lot. But then I looked up at the motel. It was gone, not abandoned or closed down, completely gone. In its place was nothing but an empty field of overgrown weeds stretching back to a line of dense trees. No building, no parking lot, no sign, not even a foundation or any evidence that a structure had ever stood there. I started the car with trembling hands and peeled out onto the highway, driving well over the speed limit until I reached the next town. I missed my interview. I drove straight back to Phoenix without stopping except for gas, even though it meant driving through the night again. It's been 4 weeks, and I still have the key. I've thought about throwing it away, but something stops me every time I try. Sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I hear whispers, just at the edge of hearing. Not enough to make out words, but enough to know they're there. And sometimes, when I glance in my rearview mirror while driving, I swear I can see a neon sign in the distance, flickering with the words, "The last vacancy." Story 17. I've been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years now. Cross-country hauls, dangerous mountain passes, blizzards, you name it. I've powered through it all. Until last Tuesday night in Echo Canyon, I was proud to say nothing had ever truly rattled me on the road. Now I can't even close my eyes without seeing that thing. I'm still shaking as I type this. My therapist suggested I write it all down, get it out of my system. I don't think it'll help, but I'm desperate for anything that might let me sleep again. It was supposed to be a routine haul, fresh produce from California to Denver. I'd done this route probably 100 times before. Echo Canyon is this narrow stretch with these massive rock walls shooting up on both sides. During the day, it's actually pretty impressive. At night, it's a different story. Most of the guys I know avoid that stretch after dark. There's all these stories, truckers hearing voices, seeing things that shouldn't be there. I always laughed it off. 23 years on the road, you hear every ghost story in the book. I wasn't the superstitious type. That night, I was running behind schedule. My GPS showed midnight when I hit the canyon entrance. The moon was full, which helped visibility, but those walls still create these deep, impenetrable shadows. The radio kept cutting in and out, just static mostly, so I switched it off and drove in silence. About 20 minutes in, my headlights caught something by the roadside that made me ease off the gas. A woman in this pale dress was standing there, arm raised like she was trying to flag me down. Middle of nowhere, midnight, no car in sight. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but something about her face in my headlights, she looked so damn frightened. I've got a daughter about her age. The thought of someone leaving my girl stranded in a place like that, I couldn't do it. I pulled over. I rolled down my window just a crack. "You all right, miss?" She rushed up to the door. "Please, I need to get out of here. My car broke down a mile back and She kept glancing over her shoulder at the darkness behind her. "Please, I just need to get to the next town." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. She climbed in so fast, she practically dove into the seat. Up close, I could see she was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing this flowing white sundress that seemed way too thin for the night chill. No purse, no phone, nothing. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging herself tight. "Thank you so much." I pulled back onto the road, watching her from the corner of my eye. "What were you doing out here alone at this hour?" She was staring out the windshield, her whole body tense. "I was driving back from visiting my mom. I've driven through here plenty of times, but tonight..." She trailed off, still not looking at me. "Tonight what?" "You're going to think I'm crazy." She finally turned to face me. "I started hearing things about an hour ago, whispers, my name, over and over. I thought it was the radio at first, but when I turned it off, they got louder." The hairs on my arms stood up. I'd heard other drivers talk about whispers in the canyon. Then I saw shadows moving on the road, not animal shadows, something else. When my car died, they started getting closer. I ran. I gripped the wheel tighter. "Look, miss. Joe." I jerked my head toward her. "What?" "Joe," she repeated, but her lips weren't moving. The voice was coming from outside the truck. My blood went cold. I'd never told her my name. "Joe Walker." The whisper seemed to slide through the cab, feather-light but ice cold. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "You hear that?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. She nodded, tears welling up. "They found us. They know you now, too." I pushed the accelerator harder. The speedometer crept up, 50, 55, 60. The canyon walls were a blur now, the road ahead illuminated only by my high beams cutting through the darkness. The whispers multiplied. Sometimes they seemed to come from right behind my ear, sometimes from the road ahead, all of them saying my name in this horrible, hungry way. My ears started to ache from the sound, like the pressure was building inside my skull. "Faster," the woman pleaded. "We need to get out of this canyon." I was already doing 70 on a road marked for 50. The truck swayed dangerously as we rounded curves, the trailer threatening to jackknife if I pushed it any harder. Then the temperature plummeted. I'm not talking a slight chill. I'm talking breath visible, fingers numb cold in a matter of seconds. The woman was hugging herself, teeth chattering. "What the hell is happening?" I meant to shout, but it came out as a whisper of my own. "Stop." This wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command, echoing inside the cab. And then it was there, standing in the middle of the road. My headlights illuminated it fully, and I wished to God they hadn't. It looked like a man, tall, impossibly thin, wearing what might have once been a suit, now reduced to tattered rags. But its face, Christ, its face. The skin was pulled so tight across the skull you could see every bone underneath. The eyes were just empty sockets, but somehow I could feel them staring right at me. It wasn't standing on the road so much as hovering slightly above it. I slammed on the brakes. 80,000 pounds of truck and cargo doesn't stop on a dime. We skidded toward it, the tires screaming against the asphalt. The woman was screaming too, a high, terrified sound that cut through even the roar of the brakes. We stopped maybe 10 feet from the figure. It didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react at all to nearly being hit by a semi. It just stood there, those empty sockets fixed on me. Then slowly, deliberately, it raised one skeletal arm and pointed directly at my chest. Pain shot through me like I'd been stabbed with an icicle. My chest seized up, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like something was physically trying to pull something out of me, not my organs, something deeper. "Turn around!" the woman was shrieking, shaking my arm. "For God's sake, turn around now!" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. That thing had me locked in place with its eyeless gaze. The pain in my chest intensified, spreading like frost across a windshield. "Joe!" The woman slapped me hard across the face. The shock broke whatever hold that thing had on me. I gasped, air flooding back into my lungs. I threw the truck into reverse, backed up frantically until I found a spot wide enough to turn around. The whole time, that figure just watched, its arms still outstretched. I executed the fastest three-point turn of my life with a 60-foot rig. My trainer would have been impressed if he wasn't dead already. As I accelerated back the way we'd come, I glanced in my mirror. The figure was following, not walking or running, but gliding above the road's surface, moving faster than anything human could. The whispers became a roar in my ears. "Don't look back," the woman shouted. "Just drive." I drove like a madman, taking curves at speeds that should have toppled us. Every few seconds I'd check the mirror, and it was still there, getting closer. The cab grew colder and colder until my fingers were numb on the wheel. Finally, I saw the canyon entrance ahead. As we burst out into the open plains, I risked one more glance in the mirror. The figure had stopped right at the edge of the canyon, that skeletal arm still pointing at us. Then it slowly lowered its arm and faded into the darkness. The whispers stopped. The temperature in the cab began to rise. My chest still ached, but the paralyzing pain was gone. We didn't speak for miles. I was afraid to break the silence, afraid those whispers might come back. It wasn't until we saw the lights of a small town ahead that the woman finally spoke. "Pull over here, please." I eased the truck onto the shoulder just as we reached the town limits. There were a few buildings, a gas station, not much else, all dark at this hour. "I need to get out here," she said quietly. "Are you sure? There's nothing open. At least let me take you, somewhere safe." She shook her head, already opening the door. "I'll be fine now. Thank you for saving me." Not many would have stopped. "What was that thing?" I asked, desperate to understand what had just happened. She paused, one foot already on the step down. "People have been dying in that canyon for centuries. Some of them don't want to be alone anymore." She gave me a sad smile. "Be careful, Joe Walker. It knows your name now." Before I could say anything else, she was gone, walking quickly toward the darkened town. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, trying to process everything, then decided to follow her, make sure she got somewhere safe, maybe get some answers. But when I got out and looked around, she was nowhere to be seen. The town was dead quiet, not a single light on in any window. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I got back in my truck and drove straight to the nearest motel. Couldn't sleep a wink. Called my dispatcher the next morning and told him I was sick, needed a few days off. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. It's been 5 days now. I've researched Echo Canyon obsessively, found old newspaper articles about disappearances dating back to the 1800s. Truckers, travelers, even a whole family in 1973, vanished without a trace. Most people blame it on treacherous roads or exposure to the elements. They don't know what I know. I still haven't figured out who the woman was. Maybe another victim? A ghost? Some kind of guardian? I don't know. All I know is that every night since then, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it. That whisper saying my name, calling me back to Echo Canyon. I've quit my job, sold my house. I'm moving across the country tomorrow. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter how far I go. That thing knows my name now, and sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear I can see empty eye sockets staring back at me. Story 18. Off. I've debated for months whether to share this. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but the nightmares won't stop. Maybe writing it down will help. Maybe someone will read this and trust their gut when it matters. This happened 3 years ago during my sophomore year of college. I was 20 years old, attending university in Tennessee, and had recently become friends with a girl named Leah from my Psych 101 class. She was bubbly and outgoing, basically my opposite, but we clicked right away. After a few weeks of study sessions, she invited me to hang out with her friend group. There were 6 of them all together. Leah, her boyfriend Tyler, a couple named Jess and Mark, this guy Ethan who was always taking photos of everything, and Robert. From the moment I met Robert, something felt off. He was probably in his late 20s, older than the rest of us. Quiet, but not in a shy way, more like he was always observing. He'd stare a beat too long, laugh a second too late at jokes. Nothing I could point to specifically, just this crawling feeling I'd get whenever he was around. When they invited me on their spring break trip to a cabin in the Smokies, I almost said no because of Robert. But I'd never been hiking in the mountains before, and everyone else seemed to like him fine. I figured I was being paranoid. God, I wish I'd listened to myself. The cabin was beautiful. This 3-bedroom place tucked away about 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, with huge windows looking out at the mountains. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in March. The plan was to spend a week there, with the highlight being a 2-day hike along part of the Appalachian Trail starting Sunday morning. Saturday was fine. We grilled, drank beer, played cards. Robert kept to himself mostly, which was a relief. I remember thinking maybe I'd been wrong about him. Sunday morning, I woke up feeling awful. Fever, chills, that whole body ache that feels like you've been hit by a truck. Probably just a bad cold, but there was no way I could hike 8 miles in that condition. "You guys go ahead," I told them when they found me huddled in a blanket on the couch. "I'll just rest and catch up with you all when you get back tomorrow." That's when Robert spoke up. "I can stay behind. Make sure Emma's okay." My stomach dropped, the way he said it, like he'd been waiting for this opportunity. But what could I say? "No, I don't want to be alone with you because you give me the creeps," would sound insane. Leah looked concerned. "Are you sure? We can all just stay." I almost said yes, please stay, but I didn't want to ruin everyone's trip, and honestly, I still thought I was overreacting about Robert. Maybe this would be a chance to get to know him better and realize my instincts were wrong. "It's fine," I said. "You guys have been planning this hike for months." They left around 9 that morning. Robert waved goodbye from the porch with me, his hand resting on my shoulder. As soon as they disappeared down the trail, he turned to me with this smile that made my skin crawl. "Just you and me now," he said. I went straight to my bedroom, claiming I needed to rest. Locked the door, took some cold medicine, and passed out for a few hours. When I woke up around 2 in the afternoon, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. I stayed in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. Around 4, there was a knock on my bedroom door. "Emma, made you some soup." I thanked him through the door, but said I wasn't hungry. "You need to eat something. Come on, open up." "I'll get it later," I called back. "Just leave it outside the door." "It'll get cold," he insisted, jiggling the doorknob. "Just open up for a second." That's when I knew for certain something was very wrong. His voice had changed, harder, impatient. I heard him testing the lock, pushing against the door. "I'm really contagious," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want you to catch this." He went quiet for a minute. Then, "All right, soup's outside the door when you want it." I didn't touch it. Instead, I texted Leah, "When are you guys coming back exactly?" No response. They were probably out of cell range on the trail. As it got dark, I heard Robert moving around the cabin, dragging things, furniture being moved. At one point I heard a hammer or something similar. I tried convincing myself he was just bored, working on some project. Then came another knock around 9 that night. "Emma, you sure you're okay in there? Maybe I should check your temperature." "I'm fine," I called out, my heart racing. "Actually feeling better. Probably just need to sleep it off." "The door's locked," he said flatly, not a question. "Yeah, force of habit, sorry. You know there's no one else around for miles." His voice was different now, no pretense of concern. "You should open the door, Emma." I didn't respond. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Still no service. I said, "Open the fucking door." He slammed his fist against it hard enough to make the hinges rattle. I jumped back, staring at the door in terror. The handle jiggled violently, then he started throwing his weight against it. The frame cracked slightly with each impact. That door wasn't going to hold. I had maybe minutes. I grabbed my backpack, dumped everything out, and shoved in what I could. Phone, jacket, water bottle from my nightstand. The window was my only option. We were on the first floor, but there was about a 6-foot drop to the ground. As I struggled to open the window, I heard him walk away from the door. Then the terrifying sound of drawers opening and closing in the kitchen. He was looking for tools to get in. The window finally gave way. I pushed out the screen and threw my backpack out first. Just as I started climbing through, I heard him coming back down the hallway. Something metallic scraped against the wall. I tumbled out the window, landing hard on my side. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline pushed me to my feet. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the trees surrounding the cabin, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until my lungs were burning. The forest was pitch black except for the moonlight filtering through the trees. March in the Smokies is still cold, especially at night, and I was only wearing sweatpants, a t-shirt, and socks. No shoes. I'd forgotten shoes. I found a fallen tree with dense undergrowth around it and crawled underneath, making myself as small as possible. The silence was absolute except for my own ragged breathing. I covered my mouth with both hands, terrified he would hear me. Then came the sound of him crashing through the woods, calling my name. First, in that fake, concerned voice. "Emma, where are you? Are you hurt?" Then, when I didn't answer, his true voice emerged. "I know you're out here. There's nowhere to go." He passed within 20 feet of my hiding spot. I could see the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the forest floor. I stopped breathing entirely until he moved further away. I spent that entire night under that fallen tree, shivering violently. Every snapping twig made my heart stop. My phone still had no service, and I was too afraid to use the flashlight. The temperature must have dropped into the 30s. When dawn finally came, I was stiff with cold and fear. I waited until full daylight before crawling out. My ankle was swollen and every step hurt, but I couldn't stay there. I had no idea which direction would lead to safety, so I headed downhill, figuring it might lead to a road or stream. I walked all day, jumping at every sound. The forest that had seemed so beautiful from the cabin windows now felt like a massive trap. I kept expecting Robert to appear from behind every tree. By late afternoon, I found a small stream and followed it, drinking when I needed to. I had no food. As night fell, again I was forced to find another hiding spot. This time I discovered a small rock overhang that offered some protection. My second night in the woods was even worse than the first. The cold had settled deep in my bones. I couldn't stop shaking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's face. On the morning of the third day, I was so weak I could barely stand. My feet were cut and bleeding from walking without shoes. I followed the stream for another few hours until, miraculously, it widened and led to a small road. I collapsed there, hoping someone would drive by. About an hour later, an older couple in a pickup truck found me. They thought I was dead at first. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me water, and drove me straight to the nearest hospital. I was severely dehydrated, had a sprained ankle, and early stages of hypothermia. When I was stable enough to talk, I told the police everything. They sent officers to the cabin right away, but they were too late. My friends had already returned to find the cabin empty and signs of a struggle. They'd called the police themselves. What the officers found in that cabin still haunts me. The entire living room had been covered in plastic sheeting. There were zip ties, duct tape, and a collection of hunting knives laid out on the kitchen counter. The hammer I'd heard had been used to secure eye bolts into the wooden beams in the ceiling. My bedroom door had been broken in. Robert had disappeared. His car was gone, along with his belongings. They found out later that Robert wasn't even his real name. He'd been using a fake identity the entire time. Nobody in our friend group knew much about his background. He'd always been vague about where he was from or what he did for work. The police launched a massive search. 22 days they combed those mountains looking for him. They never found a trace. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. My friends were devastated. None of them had any idea what kind of person he really was. Leah blamed herself for introducing him to the group, though she barely knew him herself. He'd been a friend of Tyler's brother initially. It's been 3 years. I live in Colorado now. I've tried therapy, medication, everything to stop the nightmares. I still wake up certainly standing outside my bedroom door. I can't go hiking anymore. Can't even camp in my backyard. The police told me what they think he had planned for me in that cabin. I won't repeat it here. Sometimes I wonder if he's found someone else, someone who didn't listen to their instincts, or if he's still out there in those mountains, waiting. All I know is that something inside me recognized the danger from the first moment I met him. I just wish I'd listened sooner. If you're reading this and something feels wrong about someone, even if you can't explain why, please trust yourself. Don't end up like me, jumping at shadows and sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. Because the most terrifying part of all this, I don't think he's done looking for me.